Today, I will continue to explain the visualization method of compassion and bodhicitta. It is the third session now. In the first lecture, I already explained the bodhicitta
of emptiness,
the oral pith instructions of the great perfection, and the
fallacies
of the crazy wisdom. You can find the video lecture on the Dajjom Buddhist Association's TV channel on YouTube. The second session explained the visualization method of initiating the programming and entering into the Dharma realm to attain Buddhahood. You also need to review the content in detail because there is a detailed explanation as to why you have to visualize practice in such a way. The third session today will cover the oral pith instructions in attaining the Dharmakaya Buddha of the teachings on the key of life and death. This is a very important oral pith instruction. Before explaining it, I would first like to revisit the
difference between
compassion and bodhicitta. I have already explained compassion, which, indeed, is everybody born with. But
after
a numerous continuation of births and deaths and rebirths within the cyclical existence, our Buddha nature, an awareness, originally full of compassion, and the crystal clarity, awareness, of bodhicitta, has gradually faded. However, there remains a little of such an awareness. Many are born with the heart of pity. Heart of pity is to relieve from sufferings, while heart of mercy is to give happiness. Even we still have the intrinsic awareness to share happiness with others, but it has become very weak, and so it must be restored through training. What is bodhicitta? Bodhicitta is the crystal clarity, awareness, which belongs to the awareness of the perfect enlightenment. It is the Buddha nature that each one of us originally had. But after numerous births and deaths and rebirths within the cycle of karmic existence, it has been blocked out and hardly reveals. We must strive to practice in order to let it reveal, such that we would be able to be liberated from the cycle of karmic existence. If not, we won't be able to attain Buddhahood and enter the eternal bliss. And also we have to forever face with the sufferings of the cycle of karmic existence. However, it is quite difficult to practice to restore the bodhicitta, as in order to succeed, one must incorporate precepts, meditative concentration and wisdom into one's Dharma practice. Therefore, bodhicitta is divided into relative bodhicitta and absolute bodhicitta. And relative bodhicitta is further divided into bodhicitta of aspiration, or aspirational bodhicitta, and bodhicitta of action, or action bodhicitta. I have mentioned it before that you must make a lot of worldly vows and turn them into action, such that it enables the true absolute bodhicitta of your own perfect enlightenment to manifest. For the whole process, we can divide it into 5 steps. But you would discover that, if you practice to complete these 5 steps, then you must go through a very long period of time. Without compassion, it is impossible for us to reach the pure land of Buddha. Then, we will have to continue to get suffered in the 3 lower realms, realm of hells, realm of hungry ghosts, and realm of animals, or the human realm. But, in fact, it is quite difficult for us to be reborn in the human realm, as the chances are just minimal. Without bodhicitta, we would not be able to become a Buddha. And we would also not be able to be free from the traction of the cycle of karmic existence. If we complete these 5 steps by practicing slowly, then how long would it take? According to what Buddha Sakyamuni said, if we follow the methods of exoteric Buddhism, or Sutrayana, so we comprehend slowly, and practice by reciting the Buddhist sutras, reciting Buddha's holy names and reciting mantras, then it would take us a very long time of 3 great Asamkhya kalpas to complete. Indeed, even just for step 1 to step 4. It would require the time of at least 2 to 3 great Asamkhya kalpas for one to practice. Therefore, to get to step 5, It would definitely require the time of 3 great Samkhya-kalpas to practice. However, as human life is very short, only lasts for several decades, therefore, we should cherish the human body while we are alive. We should practice as soon as we can, and by using the correct methods and key, we can actually have chances to attain Buddhahood within this lifetime, arrive at the Buddha's Pure Land within this lifetime, or be liberated from the cycle of karmic existence. But if our practice methods require the time of 3 great Samkhya-kalpas to practice, then for such a long period of time, there is basically no chance of success. I have taught in the previous session the visualization practice method that practice all from the 1st to the 5th at once. It is to separate the 24 hours of the day into 3 time periods to practice. The first period is when we are just waking up from sleep, emerging from meditation, or during a meditative concentration. While in a meditative state, during the ups and downs of the transitional periods, there are opportunities for us to enter the Dharma realm. Our Dharma nature, or intrinsic nature, will suddenly appear amid the transitional periods. But it just appears in an extremely short period of time. So how do we make use of these precious moments to help ourselves to enter the Dharma realm, such that we can be liberated from the cycle of karmic existence? We must have a training, called an initiation program in entering into the Dharma realm, and we must keep practicing this program, then there will be a chance to succeed. But isn't it enough for us to succeed for merely knowing this program? No, this is insufficient. In order to succeed, it must also be combined with the teachings on the key of life and death that will be taught today. We have already explained how to practice in the previous session. Now, we revisit it. During the transitional periods, do you know how many steps it takes to initiate the programming and entering into the Dharma realm? It is 3 steps in total. The first step is, you should visualize your own intrinsic nature, is your Buddha nature, that full of heart of pity, and you wish to integrate with all Buddhas. Why? Since all Buddhas have already restored to the perfect enlightenment, and thus the awareness, are full of mercy and pity. Therefore, if you want to join him and merge with them, then you yourself should also have the compassion. Your nature and their nature must complement, such that you would be able to integrate with them. So, what is the benefit of the integration? The benefit of the integration is that you could help yourselves and other sentient beings to relieve from sufferings and gain happiness under the protection of all Buddhas. Hence, when we are doing the practice of heart of pity to help to relieve sentient beings' sufferings, we must firstly have ourselves arousing the heart of pity. Then we integrate with all Buddhas to become oneness, so that we can dissolve all the sufferings of sentient being. After that, we need to visualize our intrinsic nature, full of heart of mercy, that is, to give happiness to all sentient beings. So, after relieving sentient beings' sufferings, we must share happiness with them. By the time you share happiness with them, in fact, you have already entered the state of Dharma bliss, such that we can help both ourselves and other sentient beings. Importantly, you ought to visualize that you, together with all sentient beings, to merge into the infinite bliss of Dharmata. Further, this kind of intrinsic nature, which is a kind of awareness, should be visualized to be all-pervasive, or prevail everywhere. If you keep on practicing this visualization, and gradually this visualization would enable you to restore your perfect enlightenment, and also enable you to enter and stay in the Dharma realm. By entering the Dharma realm to attain Buddhahood, you could be liberated from the cycle of karmic existence. This is a very important program I taught in the previous session. If you do not know this program, You cannot stay at the Dharma realm. Even if you have entered the Dharma realm, we must incorporate the teachings on the key of life and death in order to apply this visualization practice. But what are the teachings on the key of life and death? First of all, we must know what is the emergence of the key, that is, what I have just mentioned. The emergence is at the major transitional stage. When a certain level of position suddenly changes to another level of position, then it will occur. Indeed, death is one of the biggest transitional periods, so it will surely appear. But how does it appear exactly? I am going to introduce the bardo first. Bardo means transitional period. If you have heard of bardo, please do not assume that bardo is a period after death. It is not what it means. It means the transitional period. In fact, it is the transitional periods including 1. The bardo of this life, the period from birth to death, or the transitional period of one's lifetime, simply named as bardo of this life. 2. The bardo of dreaming, the period from dreaming to awakening, is also a transitional period. So, why has all these classifications? It is because they're the major transitional periods, that is, the time for one to change from one kind of bardo to another kind of bardo, which is indeed a transitional period. Therefore, bardo of dreaming is also known as the transitional period of dreams. 3. The bardo of meditation, when you practice and enter the meditative state, and you are trying to settle the chaotic mental state, and when you settle to a certain point or a certain level, you would suddenly enter a relatively crystal clarity state, that is, from chaotic to crystal clarity is also a transitional period. But to what position one could reach in terms of the level of crystal clarity from the first level ascends to the second level is a transitional period, and from the second level ascends to the third level is also a transitional period, where they all have the opportunities for the Dharma nature to appear. So, we call it, not yet reached the attainment of concentration. It is the transitional period. Prior to enter another level of realm, you are most likely to see the Dharma nature appear. 4. The bardo of dying, which is the time of death. When we formally die and enter the transitional period of dying, at this stage, our intrinsic nature, or Buddha nature, also known as bodhicitta, such perfect enlightenment, would appear for once or twice. In fact, it would appear twice, but you couldn't detect it, as it appears too short when it has already appeared. Everyone should have two chances. But if you don't know that, you should realize and cherish these two opportunities, like an ordinary people or those who didn't listen to this teaching. Then you would instantly fall into a comatose state, and you would slip into unconsciousness for approximately 3.5 days. After that, you would wake up. After waking up, you will enter 5. The bardo of dharmata, a transitional period when the Dharma nature appears noticeably. This is the transitional period, where even ordinary people have the opportunity to see it. So, what is the difference between the bardo of dying and the bardo of dharmata? This will be covered and explained in detail in later sessions, as it would be easier for you to understand at that time. Now let me generally explain it. If you have missed the stage of the bardo of dying, you will enter a stage of recognition. In fact, you will have the chance to recognize it, as you will witness the Dharma nature, or bodhicitta, to appear for the third time. So, if you're able to realize the process of its appearance, and you use a visualization practice method to merge, then you would be able to attain Buddhahood. The third stage during the period of death is 6. The bardo of becoming. If for an ordinary people, the bardo of dharmata may just appear for a few seconds and then disappear, so you don't even know it had appeared. Sometimes it appears in less than a second and then vanishes. Therefore, you don't know whether it had appeared or not. But then, you have already entered the bardo of becoming. So, if you missed the opportunity occurred in the bardo of Dharmata again, then there would be even fewer chances for the Dharma nature to appear. And also even more difficult for you to recognize the Dharma nature during the bardo of becoming. But there still have chance for it to appear, so how can we grasp the chance to practice? Indeed, this is already the last chance. If you can't practice to accomplish it so as to enable you to be liberated from the cycle of karmic existence, then you would enter a mother's womb. Being trapped by a material body, then you would be trapped there, at that particular realm. Most Dharma practitioners apply their Dharma practice methods during the bardo of becoming. This is due to the fact that they are not capable of seizing opportunities during the bardo of dying and bardo of Dharmata. Nevertheless, if you know how to grasp and what is the key, you still have the chance to become a Buddha, not just simply go to the pure land of a Buddha at this stage. There is a total of 6 transitional periods of bardo, and the period of death accounts for 3. Because death is a major transitional period, which is what Buddha Sakyamuni called the juncture and fatality of life and death, so it accounts for 3 within the 6 transitional periods. Therefore, it is the very important key teaching method that one must know. Some people say that bardo only exists after death, so it is wrong to call 100 peaceful and wrathful deities of the bardo state. It should be just the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities, such that one would have the opportunity to see them before death. In fact, those people who make such comments are either do not know the Buddhist Dharma or have a very low level of understanding of the Buddhist Dharma. And so they sometimes have written in their newspaper, magazine columns like this. They criticize some peoples who would practice 100 peaceful and wrathful deities of the bardo state, as they think even the name is wrong by adding the bardo state. The fact that they say something like that shows that they don't understand Buddhist Dharma. Bardo means transitional period. During any of the 6 transitional periods, one would witness the appearing of the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities. In fact, they always exist. Only that you couldn't see them. So, why call them the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities of the bardo state? In fact, they would appear at any time, not just after death. They would appear during any of the 6 bardo periods. So, how could we see them? They would appear during the transitional period, when the state of the consciousness moving to a higher or lower state of the consciousness. It is during the transitional period where your Dharma nature would suddenly emerge. If your awareness reveals, then you could see them. If not, you could not see them. Therefore, we generally call them the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities of the bardo state. But why add the bardo state after the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities? It is to let you know that, during a transitional period, we are able to see the manifestation of the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities at the crucial turning point of the transitional period. By seeing their manifestation, we can be saved and free from samsara, or cyclical existence. Therefore, we add the bardo state after it. However, some people are ignorant, and therefore criticize, because they do not understand. Now, let us take a look at the shortcut of the bardo of dying, to see how it manifests. In fact, we have a central channel located at the center of our body. How does it form? If you dissect the body, you wouldn't see it. It is indeed formed by the wind field, or field of qi, of the whole body. Then, why it is at the center of the body? It is because of our body structure, that all the wind field, whether their pressure is inward or outward, will all form the inner pressure that press towards the center. However, If part of your body withers, such as paralysis of one side of the body, or the whole body inclined, like your body may incline to the right, such that the pressure may be lessened on the left. Therefore, will this result in the central channel also
deviated?
Yes, it will, as your wind field has been deviated. Generally, it would just deviate, but not to the extent of diverging from the center. Unless there is a major
deficiency
in your body's structure, where even the naked eye could see the major
deficiency,
that the whole body is inclined, otherwise normally it is just inclined a bit. Nevertheless, you should remember that it is located at the center of the body. On our forehead, above the crown of the head, there is a white wisdom drop. This white wisdom drop is called the Father's element. It is the moment when we take rebirth, where the combination of the sperm and egg together with your own eighth consciousness, by using your past karmic forces to draw or other things, such that you would have your own element to combine with your father and mother essences, and thus our birth and physical body will be formed. The father is the masculine essence and the mother is the feminine essence. In fact, we are the combination of the masculine and feminine. With that, our body is formally formed. What phenomenon would appear when we die? How does the crucial moment
appear?
Death represents one would leave a stage and enter a distinctly different stage where our body would disintegrate. Completely disintegrated. However, those of us originally fallen apart and scatter in all directions, but at time, a phenomenon would appear, that is, it would combine again. At time, when it is combined, what would it be? It would unify into one unity, unify again into one unity. The mother's element is the feminine essence, which is the red wisdom drop. Where do they locate? The father is located at the crown of the head. The mother is located approximately at the distance of 4 fingers under the navel. This is the mother's element of the mother, and is the red wisdom drop. Originally, the masculine and feminine are located at these 2 locations respectively. But when we die, all things, including the wind field, will fall apart and disappear, so that it would have a kind of special state. Our mental consciousness is originally located in the central channel, and is around the same height as the heart, where
originally
houses our mental consciousness, which is non-substance, a kind of awareness, and is the eighth consciousness. But we should not call it soul, as other
religions do.
It is because a soul contains substances. So, we don't call it soul as it is non-substance. Hence, we don't call it soul. We call it the eighth consciousness, which is a kind of non-substance. The eighth consciousness is housed in the central channel, where it is close to position of the heart. We call it the heart chakra. When we die, the wind field collapses, and at that time, the central channel would contract. The central channel is formed by the wind field originally. The father and the mother elements together with our own element combine together. By the time when we are born, the wind field is lengthened, separated, and then situated at different locations. But when we die, the wind field can no longer hold up, and so the central channel contracts. As a result, the father and the mother elements can no longer stay at the original locations. However, at that time, if we do not have any knowledge for these, do not aware of the father's element and the mother's element, and do not know their locations, and do not know what will happen, then, we will fall into a state of losing control. Indeed, such kind of losing control will make us panic. But if we know the Dharma practice, so when we see the appearance of the father's element and the mother's element, then we must start the visualization practice by coordinating with the oral pith instructions. Let's take a look at the contraction now. There are signs to show that the central channel contracts. Within 20 minutes after you stop breathing, it would begin to contract. The process takes longer for those who practice Qigong, as they know how to hold up the wind field of the central channel, so that it would not contract too fast, and the process of contraction could be slowed down. In fact, when you stop breathing, all the cells in your body will be cut off from the supply of nutrition, and all your perception will gradually disappear. All the inner stuff inside your body would start to disconnect. There is no supply. As there is no supply, the time when there is no energy to support the whole body would have to withstand the air pressure from outside. When it is pressed, the inner air pressure in the central channel would press inside. As the inner pressure is so great, it makes the central channel to contract. At this time, the white wisdom drop descends, and it goes down to the location of the heart chakra. And at that moment, all the 33 kinds of thoughts connected with aversion, hatred, and anger ceases to function. Even though you often have a strong hatred in your mind, and are very easy to get angry, but when you are dying, and have to suffer great pain from the separation of the four elements, like mountains pressing you, and at another time it is like water drained from all large and small passages of your body, so that you are in a state of completely losing control, and you would panic as you know that you are going to die. At that time, you should be very angry. But as the white wisdom drop begins to descend, the hatred in your mind suddenly ceases, and you no longer feel angry and you just find it disappear. What are the 33 kinds of thoughts connected with aversion, hatred, and anger? I am not going to explain it here in detail. In short, it is generally called hatred in your mind that, in fact, can be further divided into different kinds. We call this phenomenon appearance. What is appearance? It is your Dharma nature that begins to manifest, and thus it is called appearance. When you see this kind of state, then you should know that your Dharma nature starts to manifest. What you should do when the bodhicitta or Buddha nature starts to appear? You should already start the visualization practice, as now is an intermediate period where one leaves a state and enters another state. It is time the Dharma nature begins to appear. Now is the time for it to appear. It feels like the clear and bright moonlight with the cloudless clear sky, where no cloud is blocking. You feel the clear and bright moonlight, which is equivalent to the appearance of the moon. That is, when seeing the white wisdom drop is equivalent to the appearance of the moon. Then, you should take action to promptly initiate the relevant procedures of Dharma practice, and practice in complement with the oral pith instructions. We call this phenomenon consciousness being dissolved into appearance. It means that the eighth consciousness has begun to dissolve into the Dharma
nature.
However, the eighth consciousness contains many seeds, including virtuous and evil seeds, and thus it is still not the pure Dharma nature. But when the white wisdom drop starts descending, at time when the central channel contracts and the white wisdom drop begins to descend, and as the 33 kinds of thoughts connected with aversion, hatred, and anger have gone, such that it enables the Dharma nature to have the opportunity to manifest. As the eighth consciousness could be dissolved into the Dharma nature, therefore the Dharma nature could manifest. And we call this kind of phenomenon as inner and subtle state of absorption and dissolution. So, in future, when you practice, and when your guru talks about absorption and dissolution, you know that it refers to this kind of state. It begins to absorb from the outside, and then dissolve inwardly to the state that intended for the dissolution.
Actually,
as the separation of the four elements continues, the air pressure of the central channel will continue to be pressed, where it also presses towards the mother's element of the mother, and in turn the red wisdom drop would be pressed to ascend. Why? It is because the wind field of the whole central channel is contracting from both the upper part and lower part of the central channel, and so it pushes towards the heart chakra. Why contracting towards the heart chakra? As the heart chakra is located in the middle of your body, so when the air currents are pushing, they push towards the center, and thus they press towards the heart chakra. Indeed, the eighth consciousness cannot be housed in your forehead, at below the navel, or at any other location except the heart chakra. But why? It is because the heart chakra is situated right in the center. And for this same reason, your mental consciousness would also be housed there. So, it is called the heart chakra. And thus all would move towards there. But you must remember that the heart chakra is not the same as the heart, which is situated slightly toward the left. So, you should not get it wrong. The heart is not the heart chakra, which is formed by the wind field, and is the place where our mental consciousness housed, and is located at the center of the body. So, when both contract together, the 40 thought states of desire, or greed, would disappear. It is like seeing the bright and clear moonlight. Feeling that kind of state is really great. So, you may have a sense of greed arisen, hoping to stay in such state for a longer time. But you will realize that even such kind of greed also disappears. You will notice that your awareness is crystal clarity, and you don't have any of these thoughts of greed. And we call this phenomenon increase. The meaning of the increasing increase is that the manifestation of your Dharma nature would increase even more. Initially, your Dharma nature would manifest 60%, and now it would have manifested 80%. This kind of contraction would lead your Dharma
nature
to further reveal, so that it is clearer. Hence, it is called increase. It feels like the appearance of a ray of light at the break of dawn. Remember, it is not a whole lot of light, and not glowing light, but only a ray of light. It is at the break of dawn, and so it is not bright sunlight. When we see this phenomenon, we should initiate the
relevant
procedures of Dharma practice. What procedures of Dharma practice should we initiate? As taught in previous
session,
it is the programming in entering into the Dharma realm. Many people don't know this, but I have already taught you in the last session. We call this phenomenon appearance being dissolved into increase, which means the Dharma nature has appeared and begin to manifest even more. So it is called appearance being dissolved into increase. Then, what is the final step? The last step is the masculine essence of the father's element, the white wisdom drop, and the feminine essence of the mother's
element,
the red wisdom drop. Meet at the location of the heart chakra. As the contraction continues with the air currents pushing towards the middle, the two will eventually converge and merge. They will converge and merge even though your body is inclined. At that time, 7 thought states resulting from ignorance will also disappear. You will suddenly understand a lot of things you did not understand. All of a sudden, you feel like you know everything. So, the 7 thought states resulting from ignorance has disappeared, and your awareness will reveal. We call this the merging of sky and earth, or the converging of feminine and masculine. The converging of the feminine and masculine is because of the combination of the essences of the father and mother. Simultaneously, your own element is also added into this combination, such that your body would be formed when you are born, due to the gradual formation of the wind field. They would be separated and spread into different places of your body. But when you die, the wind field can no longer hold up, so all would converge and merge towards the central point. Therefore, feminine and masculine would integrate again formally. Then, what of the phenomenon would occur when they integrate again? Actually, we call this phenomenon attainment. Attainment means to successfully obtain. Then, what to obtain? It is to obtain 100% of the Dharma nature, intrinsic nature, bodhicitta, or the perfect
enlightenment,
which would reveal. Why the perfect enlightenment would reveal? Because the 33 kinds of thoughts connected with aversion, hatred, and anger, the 40 thought states of desire, or greed, and the 7 thought states resulting from ignorance, 80 kinds of greed, hatred and ignorance, in total, dissolve. When they dissolve, they would no longer distort or uncover your awareness. As a result, the perfect enlightenment would reveal, 100% reveal, and you would feel completely dark. Then, what is the obtainment and what is the sign? It is complete darkness. Ordinary people do not understand it, so they will be frightened of the sudden change from the light of moon and sun to complete darkness, thinking that they might have fallen into the abyss of hell. Some people would be frightened. For ordinary people, they would be so frightened that they would cry out loudly. And then, they would fall into the state of coma, as they have been scared to such an extent that they fall into coma. But you should know that black is good. Actually, complete darkness, where you can't see a thing, is good. As this mean 100% manifestation of your Dharma nature. And we will explain later why it is complete darkness. What does this mean? It means the first appearance of our Dharma nature, indeed. This is the first appearance in the entire Bardo state when we die. It is
formless.
You need to settle immediately in the meditative state, and act in concert with the oral pith instructions so as to stabilize this kind of state. Complete darkness is indeed good. Why? And what does it show when 100%
Dharma
nature, or perfect enlightenment, appears? Actually, it shows 100% of the Dharma nature, which is formless, and is in the state of oneness. This is indeed the Dharma nature. Dharma nature is the state of oneness, which has no color, no substance and no form. As there is nothing, and thus it is blackness. Therefore, never thinking that blackness means that you have fallen into hell. Please don't think in this way. Instead, at this stage blackness is extremely good. Nonetheless, if you enter the bardo of becoming later, then it would be bad when it turns black. While now in the bardo of dying, turning to blackness is extremely good, as it indicates that your Dharma nature has formally manifested. So, we must find a way to stay at this kind of state. Then, what method should we use? It is to use your concentration power to
stabilize
at this kind of state, and then we should practice straight away, that is, to
initiate
the programming to practice. Then, how to practice? This will be explained
later.
Attainment is a very important state. From the emerging of appearance, to the emerging of increase, until the combination of the father and the mother. The integration of the father's element and the mother's element would bring out the state of complete darkness. It is a state where it is 100% manifestation of the Dharma nature, not even 0.01% less. As such, it is complete darkness. However, if you see a glimpse of light from the darkness, then it means that the degree of the manifestation of your Dharma nature is no longer 100%. It is black when it is 100%. This phenomenon is called increase being dissolved into attainment, meaning that this kind of increase has already reached the level of 100%, such that you have succeeded to completely obtain the Dharma nature. It is because the 80 kinds of hatred, greed and ignorance, 33 kinds of hatred, 40 kinds of greed, and 7 kinds of ignorance, have completely extinguished. Then, what does the extinguishment mean? The extinguishment of your own inner greed, hatred and ignorance would result in the appearance of your Dharma nature, which is the state of oneness. As the state of oneness would never reveal the second point to drag other things. So, all the
Tractional
forces of your karmic predators that track you would disappear. Karmic forces would disappear too. Therefore, by then, karmic forces would not have any effect on you. In what state would the karmic force appear? It would only appear in the dualistic state or multiplistic state. However, as you have already entered the state of oneness, so that you would not be drawn by any karmic force, as a result, your perfect enlightenment would appear, so this is the absolute and extremely good state. If you are not able to grasp this moment to attain Buddhahood, then it would be truly and really wasteful. Put it simply, this opportunity will just arise at each death. It would have its obvious appearance only at the time of each death. Some Dharma practitioners practice for the black retreat in caves when they are alive. There is no light in the retreat, as all the doors and windows being shut down, and there is no lamp and fire. They eat in darkness and rely on others to supply food through a hole in the next room. Once the food is placed, the door of the hole would be shut. If the practitioner wants to eat, they have to enter that room for food. It is prohibited for someone to open the door of the hole and let the light in. These
practitioners
open the tap, drink, eat, and do everything in the darkness. Why? It is because they would like to get used to the state of attainment, the state of the 100% manifestation of the Dharma nature. In the end, some feel that they have mastered it and can leave the retreat. But they cannot see the light immediately, or they will become blind. They have to gradually adapt themselves before they can leave their retreats. Therefore, not many people could adapt to the black retreat, and not many people could practice it successfully. In fact, modern people who have to make a living cannot make it. I merely introduce it to you. In fact, you don't need to practice for the black retreat. You know it and that's all. What happened to the ordinary people when they enter the bardo of dying? Attainment represents one is formally death, and also the time for the Dharma nature to formally appear. When ordinary people see complete darkness, and they do not understand, so they would fall into the state of panic and pain. They feel painful for themselves as they think that why they have fallen into hell? Why it is complete darkness? And what has happened exactly? Some feel very lonely and panic. Some are afraid of darkness. Therefore, if one wants to be successful in Dharma practice, then one should be trained to not afraid of darkness and even like it, where black is good, such that one would not feel panic. Otherwise, when you are afraid of the darkness, if you are alive, then when you encounter that situation, you would
certainly
fall into a state of panic. And when you panic, you would be confused too. And when you are confused, the Dharma nature would immediately disappear. And then you would lose consciousness and fall into coma for about 3 to 3.5 days. But, in fact, the time required is different for each person. Some people do not need to fall into coma for 3.5 days. For instance, one died of car crash and the impact of the crash is so strong. Or the tractional force of the magnetic field is so strong when one died, then, as the force is so strong, one's consciousness would be pulled out instantly from one's body. So, the time for 3 to 3.5 days refers only to the normal situation. However, some people who have had near-death experience (NDE) and recovered from death mentioned some states that they experienced, but, at times, they did not see these states, as they have not yet entered the state of attainment, such that their Dharma nature have not 100% manifested. So, they didn't enter that kind of state. Indeed, NDE is also representing a transition from one state of consciousness to another state of consciousness. Then, during the transition, is there any opportunity for the Dharma nature to appear? Yes. But, people with NDE may not know how to seize the opportunity. Secondly, when the 3.5 days have passed, but, generally speaking, 3.5 days is a reference. Whether the actual time required is longer or shorter is really depending on your virtuous and evil karma. And when you wake up from coma, your eighth consciousness would leave your body. Your eighth consciousness would leave the body when it has no support by the physical body. However, it cannot be called a soul, as it is not substance. Then you would directly enter the bardo of becoming. Would we go through the bardo of Dharmata? As said earlier, many people are not able to sense the appearance of the bardo of Dharmata, but then they have already passed through it and entered the bardo of becoming. It is because the speed for the appearance of the bardo of Dharmata is just too quick. How about the Dharma practitioners? Are they different? Of course they are. There is a significant difference between those who have practiced it before and those who haven't. Those who understand it and those who do not. When Dharma nature appears for the first time, i.e. at time when the attainment occurs, it would not appear with the stance of any form. When it occurs, you must promptly abide in the meditative state so as to enable you to stay in this kind of state, and then follow the oral pith instructions to practice, such that you could stay there for more than 3.5 days. Why? How it is calculated. This will be explained later. In fact, there are many historical records, including a book once stored in our library. And it has recorded many cases where at the time Buddhist practitioners died, they had actually died of being burned alive. And many cases in the book are concerning the exoteric Buddhism, Sutrayana, practitioners. The fact that they did not know what was really going on, but thought that the Dharma practitioners had died, so after 1 or 2 days, they burned those Dharma practitioners in a stove. They have put those Dharma practitioners in a stove to burn, and closed the stove's door, but they heard voice of screaming loud for help from the stove and sound of tapping the door. Indeed, it is very miserable. Then, what was really happening? This Dharma practitioner had originally settled at the meditative state, and he had not yet emerged from the meditative state, but then he was put to be burnt in a stove. Therefore, if one doesn't know whether the Dharma practitioners has entered the meditative state or not, one should not burn their body too quick. In fact, the time for burning the body should be postponed to as long as one could. But exoteric Buddhism, Vajrayana, practitioners are aware of these and can avoid the occurrence of such tragedies. They know that those Dharma practitioners who enter the meditative state can prolong the time to be more than 3.5 days, it may be even longer. Esoteric Buddhism practitioners know that, but exoteric Buddhism, Sutrayana, practitioners do not know. So, there are many cases being recorded where many peoples died very miserably because of that. But are there any cases where peoples of exoteric Buddhism who do not know that? Yes, there are. One of my root guru, Vajra Master Lao Yuije, had mentioned a case. There was a esoteric Buddhism practitioner in Taiwan. He might not have taught his disciples when he was alive. They do not like me who has taught so much. In fact, many peoples of the esoteric Buddhism would just give you a ritual. They would just let you follow the ritual to practice. They would not teach the way that I have done, explain a lot and in such great detail, together with in-depth teachings. Even explaining the teaching of the oral pith instructions. But they would not explain. Perhaps, they might have not understood it too, as many have explained the oral pith instructions wrongly. So how could they explain it to you? It is possible that they themselves also do not understand. Back to this case, who knows whether he didn't know or for other reasons. He just did not tell you his disciples. But then he passed away, and his disciples still don't know these teachings. So, this time, he was not pushed into the stove to burn, but it was a japata cremation, where the body of the guru was burnt on a stand with firewood. During the process, the guru sat up and also screamed. He tried to move his hands and legs, but were all bent because of the fire. The disciples were scared and were unable to comprehend what was happening, and they thought, what happened to our guru? Guru Lao
Yuiche
told us that burning a guru like that was just too cruel. In fact, whose fault was it? It is
difficult
to tell, but it should be due to karma. For exoteric Buddhism, there have been even more cases being recorded in history. It is just too many cases to be recorded that practitioners who were burnt alive when they had settled at the meditative concentration but still not yet emerged from the meditative concentration. So, please remember this firmly. Is there a way to verify whether a Dharma practitioner has come out of a
meditative
state? The answer is yes if you know how to. However, you cannot verify in some circumstances, which will be explained later. There are some circumstances that cannot be verified. Some people publish books to say that it could be verified, but that is under some other different circumstances. Nevertheless, there are some situations that can be verified, where some non-Dharma practitioners who are very attached to their bodies and thus unwilling to leave, so that they insist to attach to their body. Some, who don't want to leave their bodies, have practiced Qigong a bit before, thinking that they might have chances to come back from death, so they insist to stay there and not willing to leave their
bodies.
As a result, they can sustain longer than 3.5 days. In particular, for some special NDE cases where experiences, some ordinary people, return to life after death for more than 7 days. They did not know Qigong or Dharma practice. They were just ordinary people but were able to revive from death. This can be said that it is due to karma. Some peoples could revive from death after more than 7 days. If you see the historical cases, you will find out that there were some cases that was 10 days. So, that 3.5 days only apply to the general situations, but it is not absolutely like that. Therefore, because of fire burning, those victims would suffer a lot. Indeed, they should not have died, but died because of the fire burning, and also because of that, they had fallen into the state of panic and chaos, and then they died. So, their greed, hatred and ignorance would suddenly return, and thus they would be dragged to the bad places. Why? Because there is virtuous and evil karma in our karmic portfolio. A result from those behaviors that we did in our past lives. That all these behaviors that we have done are all filled with the tractional forces. Indeed, for the virtuous tractional force and the evil tractional force, which one would be triggered first? This is the crucial point. We have practiced Dharma for a very long time. Some chant the Buddhist sutras every day. All these have been done is to try to use our virtuous tractional force to trigger the virtuous tractional force within our karmic portfolio, so that in the future, we can be born into the Buddha's pure land. But why we fail? It is because when we die, the 80 kinds of greed, hatred and
ignorance
will extinguish. But when they reappear, will 80 kinds of them appear all at once or gradually? This is the key point. If we're at the state of panic, the impact would be enormous. Let's say, when we were still in anger and fear, but at that time we die suddenly, then the 80 kinds of greed, hatred and ignorance would reappear quickly. This will bring out all the seeds of the vicious tractional force from your virtuous and evil karma portfolio. Because of that, you would fall into the 3 evil realms. But please, I was a great well-doer, and had committed a great deal of virtuous deeds, donating all my property, worth hundreds of trillions of dollars, before I died. Hence, I had helped a lot of poor people when I was alive. It is clear that you must have some virtuous deeds from your karmic portfolio. You have saved millions of people. and thus the virtuous mental strength of these millions of people would all point toward you. In future, they will come to pay their gratitude. And this is one combination within your karmic portfolio. But you must also have committed evil deeds in your many past lives. For instance, even when you are just drinking water and breathing, you would have committed killings, as tiny sentient beings are living in water and floating in air. Therefore, you must have evil karma. So, please don't think that you have not done the unpardonable evil in this present life, so you would not have evil karma. But, in fact, that is the evil karma that you had done in your past lives. For instance, when you walk, you would carelessly step on ants and kill them. However, you don't even know the simplest practicing ritual for the deceased sentient beings that we taught in the previous fish releasing ceremony. As you don't know, so you would not have done this to resolve these karmic forces, and thus the bad karma continues to exist. Hence, you should have bad karma. Therefore, you should not blame fate and other people. You should not doubt whether you have committed any evil deeds or not, as you must have evil deeds. So, when the 80 kinds of greed, hatred and ignorance reappear, the evil deeds would also be brought out too. Therefore, because of that, many great well-doers would also fall into the 3 evil realms. So, does it mean that committing virtuous deeds are unable to save and help us? It is able to save you, but it appears later, that is, after the evil karma take effect, and also after you have to suffer from the karmic retributions. Then, the virtuous karma will have a chance to appear. But would there be an end of retributions of your evil karma if you have suffered enough of it? If you fall into hell and suffer great pain, your greed, hatred and ignorance will appear first. In fact, even though you still have little compassion and bodhicitta, but there is no way for them to appear, as the 80 kinds of greed, hatred and ignorance have concealed all the perfect enlightenment. When you are still a human, you would have a bit of compassion. When you see other people suffering, you would lend your hand to distribute alms, so you would still have a bit of compassion. But when you fall into hell, then you wouldn't even have that bit of compassion, as you are too painful and very angry, thinking that, why I have done a lot of virtuous deeds but end up falling into hell. As you are very angry, so how can you arouse a bit of compassion? You would just think that, I will not do any virtuous deeds in the future, as I had already done the virtuous deeds but it does not help me. So, what is the consequence? The 80 kinds of his greed, hatred and ignorance would lead him to follow the behaviors that he would do, get angry, and thus his nature of mind would fall into a very great madness state of greed, hatred and ignorance. Therefore, there are even more evil karma committed, and also they are the deep evil karma, as they are created by the nature of mind. Our behavior can be divided into 3, body, speech and mind. The mind is the most profound. So, when you fall into hell, you would be at the deepest state of your mind. Hence, when you arouse the greatest deal of greed, hatred and ignorance, then even though you do not use your body to kill others or using words to curse others, but only by using the depth of your mind, then you would trap your own entire mental consciousness in a dilemma. If this is the case, then there is no hope for you to get out. It is indefinite, and you won't be able to get out. Hence, there is no chance for the virtuous karma to appear, and no chance for the compassion to appear. Nonetheless, your 80 kinds of greed, hatred and ignorance would appear altogether. And this is very miserable. So, we must keep in mind that, in any situation, even to be burned by fire, being very angry, dying miserably, we must remember one thing. No matter how we die and under what circumstances, we must remember that it should appear the state of complete darkness. The white wisdom drop and red wisdom drop will surely appear. This applies not only to humans, but also even to small animals, like a very tiny,
ignorant
animal. When it dies and leaves its body, then the state would also appear, as it also has the feminine and masculine essences. If only one has a material body, the air currents would push toward the center of the body. It is all the same. It does not just happen to human beings. Therefore, we should never bully small animals. Don't think that it is only a small ant, and so I can run it over with 1 foot. Where it shows that you don't even have a bit of compassion. In case this small ant had done some virtuous deeds in its numerous past lives. When it enters the attainment stage, and when its 100% Dharma nature manifests, it would remember this
practice
method that it once learned. Then it is possible for it to promptly attain Buddhahood. Or even though it could not attain Buddhahood, it is still possible for it to enter the Buddha's Pure Land, or take rebirth in the realm of heavens, where the places have great capabilities. So, when he takes rebirth in the realm of heavens, but he still has the greed, hatred and ignorance, and he also remembers that you had trampled him to death, then he will seek his revenge. So, we must not bully small animals. We should cherish the life of any one of the sentient beings, and we should take good care of them and endow our compassion to them. In fact, the more compassion we endow, the better able for the bodhicitta of our perfect enlightenment to manifest. Even though we might suffer a lot from burning to death, we should not get angry and blame
others,
but we must persist and endure, and we should make sure that we can get through this difficulty. And then at the last moment, we should just cherish that merging of sky and earth, or converging of masculine and feminine, and the state of the manifestation of the Dharma nature. And this is indeed the only place that we should pay attention to. And this is what I want to remind you. Indeed, no matter how we die in the future, we should know that it is all because of the retributions of the karmic force, so just let nature take its course. Let us just take these karmic retributions, as our focus is not here. Not to investigate who is making us suffer from these pains. Indeed, our focus is to enable us to liberate from cyclical existence, to enter the Dharma realm, and become a Buddha. I just want to enter the state of oneness, not the dualistic or multiplistic state. And you should remember this firmly. When the white wisdom drop appears, we should immediately recognize that our intrinsic nature has already manifested, which is belong to the masculine, and it feels like we're under the cloudless clear sky. There is a clear and bright moonlight. It means that, at that time, there is nothing, but we would only see the clear and bright moonlight. When the red wisdom drop appears, we should immediately recognize that the intrinsic nature has enhanced, which belongs to the feminine, and it feels like a ray of light at the break of dawn with red and yellow colors. You should remember its characteristics too. When the white wisdom drop is descending and the red wisdom drop is ascending, please remember that the sequence may vary from person to person, as due to the differences in the teaching methods of each sect or school, so that it would cause the differences in the emerging sequence of the white wisdom drop and the red wisdom drop, and also, as according to the karma of each person, the distribution and location of each person's white wisdom drop and red wisdom drop is different too, where they are formed in accordance with each person's karmic portfolio, so it may have deviation, resulting in the difference in the ascending or the descending sequence. Hence, each person would have his or her sequence. Therefore, we should not focus on which one, the white wisdom drop, or the red wisdom drop, would appear first. and the sequence of ascending or descending, as this is totally depending on each person's teachings and karma. Generally speaking, however, it still takes place in these three orders, that is, appearance, increase, and attainment. When the 100%
perfect
enlightenment appears, then you should be cautious about the first step, for the intrinsic nature starts to appear to have deviation, such that you would begin to draw and link up with substances. What is the first step? The first step is entering the separation state of the two characteristic states of the
masculine
and the feminine. Indeed, there are two situations for it to occur. The first
situation
is when we die. Originally it should be complete darkness, but when a ray of light suddenly emerges, then we should be cautious, as it reminds us that substance is starting to appear. Because light itself is a sparse substance. As such, you should know that the masculine and the feminine is already starting to separate. The second situation is why the phenomenon of the separation of the masculine and feminine appear. When we entered a mother's womb, the father and mother's sperm and egg merged, and we also involved in the process. And at that time, it was also complete darkness. But when they separated in a split second, it was also the beginning of the formation of our body and the linkage of substance. So, you should remember this. That is, when the separation of the masculine and feminine occurs, then we would draw and link up with substances. It is because when the 80 kinds of inner, greed, hatred and ignorance, are cut off, it means that we are disconnecting with the external karma. And, indeed, both of them would occur at the same time. Subsequently, the two characteristic states of the masculine and feminine can be successfully united without any hindrances. That means at the moment of death, one is able to restore the 100% intrinsic nature, or Buddha nature. As at this moment, it is the true and pure state of oneness, so it is blackness, representing the Dharma nature that does not have any form, but only has the perfect enlightenment. There is only the awareness, exits. However, the awareness is not a substance. So, it does not have any form, any state, any form of appearance of Buddha, and also does not have any light. Indeed, it is nothing at all. However, there exists only the awareness of the perfect enlightenment. The state of the absorption and dissolution during the bardo of dying is indeed a kind of restoring process, that is, at time we link up with substance up until the time we die. Only at the moment of our death, we would restore back our primordial, intrinsic nature, or Buddha nature, so this state is a kind of restoring process that recovers our primordial, intrinsic nature. And this is the state for the Dharma nature to emerge for the first time. How long does it take from the emerging of the red and white wisdom drops to the unity of the red and white wisdom drops? This indeed depends on the time of the dispersion of your wind qi. Normally it takes approximately from a few seconds to 10-something seconds. Those who have practiced Qigong before are those who are good at meditative concentration. And if they want to hold on to the state of the
unity,
then they would be able to extend the time. However, we do not need to do so, as when we try to do this, then, on the contrary, we would forget the practice method of initiating the programming and entering into the Dhamma realm to attain
Buddhahood.
If you keep thinking about other things, then you would waste the teachings in the previous session, that is, the procedure for initiating the programming and entering into the Dhamma realm to attain Buddhahood. Indeed, it would be a waste. But then why someone want to hold on to the state of the unity? For the Qigong practitioners, if they want to do this, that is their business. Perhaps, you may say that, once there was a guru who taught you to do this. But clearly, this is because they do not know this practice method, initiating the programming and entering into the Dhamma realm to attain Buddhahood. as they don't know, and thus they try to hold on to the state of the unity. The purpose is to prolong the time of the unity, as they are not ready, so they want to slow it down. But if you know this practice method of initiating the programming in entering into the Dharma realm to attain Buddhahood, then you should not focus on the place that you shouldn't. You should not even think of it, as the whole process is just too quick, but then, when you still focus there, the process would just finish in a split second, and you would lose this opportunity. Therefore, our attention should only focus on the procedure of initiating the programming in entering into the Dharma realm to attain Buddhahood, taught in the previous session. And you should not distract by other things, or thinking of other things, as the process is just too fast, no more than 10-something seconds. In fact, the state would vanish in just a split second. By then you would lose the chance, and it would be such a pity. If, at this moment, you're able to recognize and realize, then you would be able to attain the Dharmakaya Buddha, or Dharma body of Buddha, and it is called black attainment. So, what does the attainment mean in black attainment? It means that at time when the 100% of the Dharma nature manifests, you are able to attain Buddhahood. It also means one's attainment of the Dharma body of Buddha at the moment of total darkness, or blackness. Here I would like to explain the meaning of the Dharmakaya Buddha, or Dharma body of Buddha, the Sambhogakaya Buddha, or enjoyment body of Buddha, and the Nirmanakaya
Buddha,
or emanation body of Buddha. If you want to have the detailed explanations of the Dharmakaya Buddha, you can read the articles of the meaning of near-death experiences in the issue 4 and 5 of the Lake of Lotus. Here let me verbally describe again what it means by the Dharma body of Buddha, the enjoyment body of Buddha, and the emanation body of Buddha. When we are affected by the influences from some negative emotions and energies, collectively called greed, hatred and ignorance, and is roughly divided into 80 kinds, it would be good for them to be completely stopped at this moment. That is why, when you practice, your guru would urge everyone to remove greed, hatred and ignorance, extinguish greed, hatred and ignorance. In fact, you have better to practice Dharma in a mountain cave because you would not be disturbed by others, so that you can slowly eliminate your greed, hatred and ignorance, as no one would harass or anger you. Therefore, it would be easier for you to extinguish them. But, in fact, it is very hard for us to practice Dharma in mountain caves, or even to cut off our relationship with other people, hoping that we could eliminate all our greed, hatred and ignorance. Indeed, these are very hard to do. However, it turns out that at the moment of our death, we do not need to work too hard and all our greed, hatred and ignorance would be extinguished naturally. This is indeed the extremely rare opportunity for us, as they extinguish at that time. So it allows the complete manifestation of the Dharma nature, that originally possessed by and always existed in sentient beings. In fact, Dharma nature is a great ability. In Buddhist Dharma, we call it the Buddha nature, intrinsic nature, primordial nature, or bodhicitta. This intrinsic nature has possessed absolutely great power and can be revealed in 3 forms. The first is called the Dharma body, or Dharmakaya. It is formless and non-substance. One of its characteristics is that it is all-pervasive and being everywhere. No instrument or observation can detect its existence. This is called the Dharma body. Therefore, when you are in the state of attainment of complete darkness, as it does not have any form, hence, it is total blackness. If you could realize at that time, then you would be able to attain the Dharma body of Buddha. What is the enjoyment body, or Sambhogakaya? It occurs when your 100% Dharma nature begins to enter the dualistic, or multiplistic, state. Why? because the Dharma body is at the state of oneness, while the enjoyment body means that it is already at a dualistic or multiplistic state. As such, there will be light. When you see light, it means that you are in a dualistic or multiplistic state. When your Dharma nature, from a state of oneness, begins to enter the dualistic state, the first step for it is to pull and link up with the most sparse substance. What is the sparse substance? It is light, therefore, at the split second when it appears to enter a dualistic state, you would see it with a very bright light. Its luminosity can be brighter than 1,000 suns. Some books or great Dharma practitioners have said that it is difficult to describe its luminosity by saying the brightness is equivalent to how many suns, as they don't know how to compare. And there have no historical records for the luminosity and the heat of a sun, as they did not know these, and also they didn't have the scientific knowledge. So some people say it is not 1,000 suns but 100 million suns. In fact, there is a huge
difference
between 1,000 and 100 million, so what makes it happen? You say 1,000. But that book says 100 million, and the reason for this is that it is impossible to measure. The ancient people did not know the degree of heat of a sun. So the intensity of the light may be the brightness of 100 million suns, and therefore, they said the luminosity is 100 million. Actually, we don't need to know that it is 100 million or 1,000, but it is overall a state of extremely brightness. Its luminosity exceeds the scope of our visible light. Therefore, it is invisible to the naked eye. Some people once wrote to me via email. They are from a different
religion.
They said that the rainbow body Buddha of the red sect is not a big deal. When we practice, our disciples and the disciples' disciples can see the appearance of our founding masters. They appear in illuminated form of light. We all see them. While for those of you who practice the red sect, how many disciples and the disciples' disciples have seen the rainbow body? So, this proves that you, i.e. the red sect, are a bit inferior. I responded to their email in this way. I replied to them very politely. I said, I have no intention of offending any religion. I have no intention of offending the practice of anybody. However, I want to explain and wonder whether you know that the brightness of a enjoyment body of Buddha, or Sambhogakaya Buddha, is more than 1,000 suns. And your power of meditation should reach the same level as of the Bodhisattva of the 8th level, and above. Then you would be able to see 1% of light of a enjoyment body of Buddha. In fact, when you practice Dharma, it is similar to taking the piano performance exams, where they have level 1, 2, 3 to 8, which is the highest, but for our Dharma practice, we not only have level 1 to level 8, i.e. first ground to 8th ground. The practitioner could also move along the path to the 10th ground, and there are also even higher ground that the practitioner could accomplish. Nonetheless, at least you have to practice to the same level of power of meditation of the Bodhisattva of the 8th level, and above. Then with such incredible ability, it would allow you to see 1% of light of a enjoyment body of Buddha, that is just 1% out of the 100%. The naked eye is definitely unable to see it. So, I also answered them in this way. I said that it does not mean that they are inferior if they are unable to see it. I said it is normal if one is not able to see it. As the enjoyment body of Buddha is invisible, while you see your founding masters, and that is you see something, but that does not mean that it is of a very high level. I answered him very politely. Indeed, you must remember, if it is a enjoyment body of Buddha, then you would not be able to see it. But how do we draw the image of the enjoyment body of Buddha? At time when we are unable to see and there is no other way available, so we paint a similar image of a enjoyment body of Buddha, but in fact, it is just a beam of radiance, and you are unable to see them. What is the emanation body of Buddha, or Nirmanakaya Buddha? That is, we have to reduce the brightness of the enjoyment body of Buddha, reducing its level to the range of visible light, and reducing to a level where it is able to combine with other substances. With this combination, it forms the image that is able to appear, that is, able to project an image of a Buddha to be seen by you. As such, the Buddha has manifested 32 appearances and 80 types of good forms, such that you know that this is the form of a Buddha, and we call it the emanation body of Buddha, as it has already combined with substances. Therefore, in our Dharma practice, we should use the power of meditation to cut off all interferences, such that we would be able to restore our intrinsic nature. What is the reason for that? That is, we must try to restore our Dharma nature. To achieve that, we need to cut off all interferences. That is why, in our Dharma practice, many people have been stuck in the mountain caves to practice, as they want to break away from all interferences so as to enable them to restore the Dharma body, so that is why they practice in the mountain caves. It is also because, when we die, it occurs where karma has been cut off from the connection. But please do not forget that even if you practice in the mountain caves, your karma has not been cut off yet. Even if you try to cut off all interferences with your power of meditation, your karma has indeed not been cut off. So, that is why, once there was a Dharma practitioner whose physical body was sitting, he kept
sitting.
And obviously he had already entered that meditative state. And within that meditative state, it seemed like that he was very close to enter the state of Dharma nature, almost see the Dharma nature, as he had achieved a very high level of power of meditation. But suddenly a poisonous snake appeared. He was bitten and died. He died at that moment. But why is that? It is because even you use your power of meditation to cut off all interferences, and even get to the state of attainment, and your Dharma nature is truly emerging. But as long as you are still not able to reach the state where the 100% of your Dharma nature manifests, then that means you still cannot extinguish completely those 80 kinds of greed, hatred and ignorance. In fact, you must have the manifestation of 100% of your Dharma nature, such that the 80 kinds of greed, hatred and ignorance would also be extinguished completely. Even if you just have a small amount of them remains unremoved, then karma would still exist. And, at time, this karma would bring the karmic creditors to find out where you are. Just like that poisonous snake, who find out the practitioner that killed the practitioner. As karmic creditors hate you so much, that they want you to die. But then you are about to become a Buddha soon, so they would definitely not want you to become a Buddha. Thus, they would certainly kill you. And that is why you would fail. This is an explanation to let you know that under what conditions there is no karma. However, cutting off from karma is difficult, indeed extremely difficult. Even if you had practiced for many lives, you may still not be able to cut off from your karma. And that is why the key arisen from the death is very important, so we must cherish it. How about we attain the Dharma body of Buddha? We will enter a state of so-called union of bliss and emptiness, or inseparability of emptiness and bliss. What does this inseparability of emptiness and bliss mean? It represents the state of oneness. That is called inseparability of emptiness and bliss. But you should notice that this is bliss, not luminosity, not brightness, as luminosity contains substances. When talking about luminosity, it would contain substances. So here it can't be called luminosity, such that you can't call it as union of luminosity and emptiness. I have seen some books refer it to union of luminosity and emptiness, and that is wrong. Indeed, it should be called the inseparability of emptiness and bliss. Emptiness refers to the neither existence nor voidness of the state of oneness. Bliss refers to the blissfulness of the Dharma realm of the state of oneness. It is a kind of realizing and sensing. So, it is the state of oneness and is called inseparability of emptiness and bliss. That the reason to describe it as
inseparability
is actually meaning that both things are united to become oneness. And this is the realizing and sensing, and realizing and knowing of the perfect enlightenment. This is why you have to visualize these within the visualization practice for initiating the programming in entering into the Dharma realm, such that it would enable you to dissolve into the Dharma realm, and to merge together with all the Dharma nature, to enter the state of oneness. Therefore, you have to visualize like this. So, when would the Dharma nature appear for the second time? We will explain it now. If you have missed the opportunity during the stage of attainment, and you are unable to enter the Dharma realm, and you are unable to stay in the Dharma realm by using the power of
meditation,
and you also do not understand the programming of entering into the Dharma realm that we have taught you, or even we have taught you this programming, but you do not practice it, and do not know how to enter. Or as I have said before, that there remains a lot of
details,
that if you do not have a guru who could teach you step by step, then you would miss a lot of details, including some oral pith instructions are missing, or some oral pith instructions are unclear, or some details are missing, such that you just know how to do it in general. But since you do not have a long-term and appropriate training, so you would miss the opportunity and fail. When you miss the opportunity and fail, then you will move on to the next stage, the second appearance of the Dharma nature. How does it occur? When the Dharma nature appears for the second time, it has already been in the dualistic state. The Dharma nature has no longer at its complete state of 100%, it may already decline to 98%, or it just keeps falling. When the Dharma nature appears for the second time, the Dharma practitioner will wake up. He will see something like the beginning of the formation of the universe, and the division of sky and earth into two. Why would he see the division of sky and earth into two? It means that the feminine and masculine aspects of things has begun to separate. So he would see the division of sky and earth into two, which means that the feminine and masculine aspects of things starts to separate. As I said before, when any one of the state of consciousness has entered into another state of consciousness, and the difference between them is far apart, then that Dharma
nature
would appear too, as moving from the state of oneness to a dualistic state, so your Dharma nature would appear one more time. This time, it appears with brightness. And this indeed is the second time for our Dharma nature to appear. It also means that our restoration process has already completed, and that is the last time for the Dharma body to appear. Indeed, it is the last time. What is this kind of brightness? It would suddenly appear. We call this state attainment, being dissolved into luminosity. That means it begins to fall from 100%, and thus no more 100%. This state is named as attainment, being dissolved into luminosity. It also represents, from the state of oneness to enter into a dualistic state. If the Dharma practitioner can recognize and realize those lights, and practice the practice method called the meeting of the mother and son luminosity, then the Dharma practitioner can still attain the Dharma body of Buddha. But this also needs to be taught to you by the Guru. If you are not able to attain, then you would enter the next stage, the Bardo of Dharmata. We will not explain the Bardo of Dharmata today, but we will explain it in the next session. For the Bardo of Dharmata, one should use another practice method to practice. It is a different method. back to this Dharma body, when the Dharma nature appears for the second time, there will be the appearance of brightness, which is called the luminosity of Dharma body. It is where the Dharma nature has just declined from 100% to 99%. And in between 100% and 99%, its light is called the Dharmata clear light. If one attains Buddhahood at this moment, one could become a Dharma body of Buddha, and also one could simultaneously attain enjoyment body of Buddha and emanation body of Buddha. Therefore, some people call it luminosity of Dharma body. But I want to clarify a point that Dharma body should not have any substance, so it would not have any light. But enjoyment body of Buddha would have the appearance of light, as enjoyment body of Buddha have substance. When the degree of the Dharma nature continues to fall, it can no longer be called the luminosity of Dharma body. When it goes down to 90%, how can we still call it the luminosity of Dharma body? Let's say, for those persons who don't practice, how long would they see these luminosity? It would be approximately a split second up to a few minutes. While for those Dharma practitioners, they could use their power of meditation to keep those luminosity, then do you think they could keep that long, like a few minutes? It depends on your karma. Sometimes you would feel like that you had already experienced it for a long time, but, in fact, it could be just a short period of time. Only that you may feel that it is very long, but, in fact, it was just a short period of time. For reference, you can watch a video lecture on the Dajom Buddhist Association's TV channel on YouTube. Essence of the Heart Sutra, which is the last episode A in a series of 7 episodes on the Dharma practice of mind training. In this video lecture, there is a foreigner called Alan, who have had
near-death experience,
NDE, and he described many feelings arisen and the things that he realizing and knowing at the moment of his near-death experience. You would notice that he talked about many things. Then does it mean that he had stayed there for a long period of time? He himself may feel that it was a very long time. However, I can tell you that, in fact, it was not a very long time. Only that you realize and know, and feel that it was a very long time, as you can't tell the time. What do you say, if I know how to make use of my power of meditation, to get hold onto it, then could I stay there for a bit longer? The answer is yes. You can stay as long as you like. You said I could meditate for 3 days before I emerge from meditation. Then the period of these 3 days is called the period of abiding in concentration. The period of time of staying in the meditative state is called the period of abiding in concentration. If you say that I am only able to get hold on to 3 minutes before emerging from meditation, then 3 minutes for you is called an period of abiding in concentration. How long can we stay normally? 1 to 5 period of abiding in concentration are possible. Some may have more, but
generally,
it is 1 to 5. Therefore, when the Guru teaches us to meditate, then should we practice it? Of course, we should. At least 5 minutes are required. If you do not meditate for several minutes, how can you expect to have an period of abiding in concentration? We have to see how long our period of abiding in concentration is. If only you can stay there for a bit longer, then you would have already been able to enter that state. So, you could have already entered it with just 1 period of abiding in
concentration.
If you know the oral pith instructions, and you know how to initiate the programming in entering into the Dharma realm, then it does not take long before you could enter the Dharma realm to attain Buddhahood. Then, when the Dharma practitioner emerges from the meditative state, and if the Dharma practitioner has already attained the Dharma body of Buddha at the state of black attainment, and could stay in the Dharma realm, then there would have no signs appeared on his physical body. For instance, there is a Dharma practitioner who passed away, and I want to verify whether he has emerged from his meditative state, and whether he has entered the state of attainment, and if so, are there any signs? If the Dharma practitioner attains at the state of black attainment, then you would not see any sign. But some books mention that there will be red body, white body, or both flowing out. In fact, there will be none. Why? It is because he is at the 100% state of oneness, and with that, he enters the Dharma realm, where there does not have any sign, as he could enter the Dharma realm quickly to attain Buddhahood. So there is no need for him to come out from anywhere in his physical body, like coming out from the crown of the head, or from left or from right. There is no need for it. In short, if one is using the state of oneness to enter the Dharma realm, then one could be all-pervasive, so there is no need for one to do anything. However, when the Dharma practitioner emerges from the meditative state, and if he attains accomplishment during the stage of attainment, being dissolved into luminosity, if that is the case, then people around him may see some signs. Nonetheless, some may see it while some may not. If you're a bit slow, then you may not see it. While there is a chance that you may see some light appearing, but it is not guaranteed. Why? Because light may appear in many situations, so when light
appears,
that doesn't mean the Dharma practitioner has attained Buddhahood during the stage of attainment, being dissolved into luminosity. Indeed, light may appear in many situations, as luminosity is substance from a dualistic or multiplistic state. Nonetheless, if you emerge from the meditative state and still not be able to attain the Dharma body of Buddha, then you need to rely on a method that is called the practice of Phowa, also called the practice of transference of consciousness, through which that enable you to relocate your own eighth consciousness to the Buddha's Pure Land. This time, you have to rely on the wind, or qi, generated by your visualization, as you are already dead, so all your wind inside your body has already gone. In fact, having failed in your first and second attempts of Dharma practice, you would not have any wind left, so you have to rely on the visualized wind. Besides, if there is a guru who can help you by performing practice, so that he helps that together with you to visualize to pull you out. In fact, by using the visualized wind, you visualize your mental consciousness smashing out from the crown of your head, smash out to the Buddha's Pure Land. Therefore, some books say if you do this, then you would be able to smash out successfully. How to prove whether one has smashed out successfully or unsuccessfully? And the book mentioned that if you have red and white wisdom drops flowing out from the upper part of your body, then that proves that you have smashed out successfully. On the other hand, if some who do not smash out well, then it will flow out from the lower part of the body, while some ordinary people also have it flow out from the lower part of the body. Then does this mean that their consciousness have already come out if you see the red and white body flow out? As a matter of fact, such phenomenon only means that their eighth consciousness have already left their body, so their dead body could be put to burn. But does it mean they are able to be reborn in the Buddha's Pure Land? Not necessarily. As I said before, whether you can take rebirth in the Buddha's Pure Land depends on whether your nature of mind is correct and what degree of compassion that you have possessed. If you have no compassion, and if you commit theft of the Dharma, that is, you use the ways of deceiving, eavesdropping, or stealing to get the Dharma, thus you have violated a severe precept, and that would connect you with the karmic force of the vicious magnetic fields. As a result, you will fail. That the wind that you visualized can push the red and white body out from the crown of your head, but that doesn't mean that you are guaranteed to be reborn in the Buddha's Pure Land. If it does, then we do not need to practice for such a long time. And Buddha Sakyamuni did not need to teach Dharma that hard for 49 years in order to train your nature of mind. It is because, if only telling you, when you have time, practice a bit of the Qigong, and try to practice daily by smashing out the wind from the crown of your head, then this will guarantee you to be reborn in the Buddha's Pure Land. There is no need to have mercy and pity, and compassion is also not required. Indeed, that is proved to be wrong. But how come some people say that is possible? This is actually called the attachment of forms. In fact, our Dharma practice should emphasize the most on the correction of the nature of mind. And we must also know the teachings on the key of life and death. Besides, we must not depart from the purity of the nature of mind, and the visualization practice of compassion and bodhicitta. If you do not have the visualization practice of compassion and bodhicitta, then there is no way for you to become a Buddha. So, when I teach you the initiation programming in entering into the Dharma realm, you will notice that you are required to relieving sufferings and giving happiness to all sentient beings, so that it would enable you to be able to enter the Dharma realm. Otherwise, your programming can't be called programming. This is similar to the practice that I explained to you earlier. If you just visualize to push the wind out, but doesn't involve compassion, as you do not visualize compassion, so basically, it lacks this element, compassion, in your visualization, such that the entire visualization is just to visualize some wind to smash upward. Therefore, as you practice like that, then you will definitely fail. It is because your nature of mind is deviated, and your practice is merely to smash out some fluid. Actually, it would be better for you to invent a machine to be installed on the crown of your head to pump out air. Clearly, it is meaningless. Therefore, you must remember not to do so. But now I still want to explain a bit about some near-death experience cases, where there were once having the occurrence of the shared death experiences. That is, the people who accompany the dying person do not die but just accompany the dying person. At the moment when the dying person stops breathing, they actually feel all the feel of the deceased. Such as the deceased sees lights, they also see lights, and the deceased sees darkness, they also see darkness. If the deceased experiences the separation of the four elements, and see extremely horrible scenes, they also do. For the description of these scenes, you must watch the video lecture called Profound Studies on the Tibetan Book of the Death 1. The Keys at the Moment of Death and the Essences of Salvation, available on the Dajom Buddhist Association TV channel on YouTube, which explains the phenomena appeared at the moment of death. I will not explain them here, but I will only describe the most important part, because it is related to the practice method that I teach you. Therefore, I must first talk about this part. But I will not explain the rest. So, what are these scenes? Actually, you have to watch this video as a reference for you to know. But then, why you should know that? You must watch it, as otherwise when you experience that scene, you would be so frightened that lead you to coma. Then, you would miss the following stages of appearance, increase, attainment, and luminosity. Therefore, you must know what happens in the former stages, such that you would be able to move along to the later stages. Hence, you should remember to watch the video on your own, as I do not have time to explain more about it. Back to the shared death experiences, while they were in the same room, and some even from a further distance, who were not in the same room, they could actually be under the same magnetic field and felt all the feel of the deceased. However, the occurrence of this situation is very few. Indeed, it is extremely rare. Most people must be at the side of the deceased, that is, under the same magnetic field. so that they would directly feel what the deceased feels. And at that time, they could see the light. Therefore, even if they saw the light that the deceased witnessed, it does not mean that the deceased has already attained Buddhahood. In most of the accounts, there was the appearance of light. In some cases, even for those who did not have the shared death experiences, but as they were at the side of the deceased, they also saw the light. They did not feel everything that the deceased had felt, and they did not see all kinds of phenomena that the deceased experienced. But they only saw some light coming out from the body of the deceased. However, the deceased were not Dharma practitioners, and these cases were recorded in foreign countries. Then, you would say why people who did not practice Dharma could become Buddhas. Now I explain to you that these are natural phenomena. Not that they have already become Buddhas. Seeing light on the deceased's body does not mean that the deceased has become a Buddha. On the other hand, if the deceased's body cannot release light, it does not mean that he cannot become a Buddha. Simply speaking, it does not work like this. Even if you see light appearing from the deceased, it does not mean that the deceased has already become a Buddha, as every single sentient being would have chances to have light appearing. What are the number of times and procedure of the appearance of the Dharma
nature,
bodhicitta? I will explain it now. During the bardo of dying, the first appearance of the Dharma nature, bodhicitta, is formless. The second appearance of the Dharma nature, bodhicitta, is actually the first appearance of light. It is like at the break of dawn. It is not a very bright sunlight, but just like at the break of dawn. And this is called the first appearance of light in the bardo of dying, but this is different from the appearance of light in the bardo of dharmata. The light intensity, or luminous intensity, is completely different. And you should remember this firmly. The first appearance of the light is like at the break of dawn, where it is the light appeared when one is just entering the dualistic state. In the bardo of dying, if you can recognize and realize the Dharma nature, bodhicitta, then you can attain the Dharma body of Buddha, but it is very difficult to master. Most Dharma practitioners have failed. I can tell you that all or a majority of Dharma practitioners would fail. That is, 99.9% of the Dharma practitioners would fail. Why? Because they lack several things. First, they do not have the initiation program in entering into the Dharma realm that we have taught you. They try to practice based on what they have just read from some Buddhist sutras and tantras, such as the Treasury of Dharmadhatu, and those oral pith instructions that being passed on by predecessors. While some people have misinterpreted the oral pith instructions, some do not even have the oral pith instructions, and some even do not have the training of the nature of mind, so they would all fail. You can refer to our video lecture entitled Profound Studies on the Tibetan Book of the Death, which have explained in detail. You can watch it again. The third appearance of the Dharma nature, bodhicitta, occurs during the stage of the bardo of dharmata. After that, there might be a chance for it to appear during the stage of the bardo of becoming. In the next two sessions, I will explain these two bardo periods in more details. Like what type of practice methods should we practice for these two periods? Now I will explain a bit more about that. As a Dharma practitioner, while you are alive, it is better for you to be able to practice the Great Perfections Trekcho, which is the training that directly pointing to the nature of mind. I will explain a bit more on this. Indeed, this is one of the necessary criteria if we want to attain the Dharma body of Buddha in the stage of the bardo of dying, therefore, you must know it. If you do not know the training that directly pointing to the nature of mind, then you would fail. The failure rate is just too high. Second, there will be hope for you if your guru is willing to monitor and correct your nature of mind and behavioral formulae and programming. But I know many gurus who do not like these things. They just like to confer the empowerments to people, as it does not require a lot of efforts, and they can make money easily, and also they can widely accept a large number of disciples. So, they keep conferring a large
quantity
of empowerments, which, in fact, is violating the precept. Even though after
giving
the empowerment, they have also taught you the Dharma rituals. So, many people
believe
that they will succeed after receiving empowerments and learning
rituals.
They think, on top of these, they have also followed the teachings to visualize. So, why would they still fail? In fact, the question is why you need a guru. It is because a guru would follow up your case. And it actually means that you would have a
specially assigned
expert to teach you. Then, why exoteric Buddhism's practitioners would fail? It is because they do not have a specially assigned expert to follow them, that is, they do not have the guru, so they have to explore for themselves, slowly by reading sutras. And that is why the Lord Buddha Shakyamuni said that, by following the path of the exoteric Buddhism, it would take you the time of 3 great Samkhya kalpas to practice and attain accomplishment. However, why esoteric Buddhism, or Vajrayana, tells us that one could attain Buddhahood in the present lifetime. It is because they have a guru, meaning that they would have a specially assigned expert to teach you. Nonetheless, if this guru is not an authentic guru but someone who is just deceiving you for their personal gain, he would grant you as much empowerments as you like. So, in fact, he has already
violated
the precept, as he does not even understand Buddhist Dharma, so that he would try every trick to cheat and lie. But this is wrong. In fact, what is the purpose of having a guru? The guru is responsible for correcting and following up disciples' nature of mind and behavioral formulae and programming. But how to correct? At least, he needs to understand you. If he does not even know your name, does not recognize you when he meets you on the street, only you could recognize him as your guru. And that really is a problem. Even if he could
recognize
you, but he could only teach you some rituals. And you just know to practice blindly, and also you just know to ask for empowerment. There is absolutely no
correction
of your nature of mind. Like, for instance, if you violate the precept, your guru would remain silent and would not care about it. So, when you do something wrong, your guru would not tell you anything but just let you do the wrong things. As a result, your nature of mind cannot be corrected. As it cannot be corrected, then it means that you would not be able to succeed in your Dharma practice. Even if you understand the stages of appearance, increase, attainment and
luminosity,
and you think you will succeed to enter the Dharma realm, you think, at time when all my greed, hatred and ignorance extinguished, then I could enter the Dharma realm. But in the end, you still miss something, because its appearance is very fast. If you do not follow the teachings of an authentic guru, then you would still lack of some details. Even if your guru has taught you some programs, but then you still do not follow some details to practice, then it won't work. As such, you would have to explore for yourself slowly. You think you would still remember it when you die. But, at time, when you take rebirth, and once you have connected to the substances, then you would forget it. In fact, when you enter the stage of the bardo of becoming, you would already forget about it, that is, already forget what to do in order to enable you to enter the Dharma realm. And when your Dharma nature 100% manifests, you may realize a little bit. As when the Dharma nature has already appeared, you would then just take rebirth. And when you take rebirth, you will be controlled by the material
structure
of the brain. Let's say, if you take rebirth as a lower animal, then you would not even understand the word of Buddhist Dharma. But if you take rebirth to a higher level, such as human or heavenly being in the realm of heavens, then it would be better. But the heavenly beings have a poor memory, and that is the reason why they would not succeed in their Dharma practice. So, if you take rebirth as a heavenly being, but due to your poor memory, so you could not recover too many memories, even though you may remember some, but you would soon forget about them. Human beings only have a lifespan of several decades. Even if you can remember, you may only remember very little. And when you grow up to 3 years old, then everything will be forgotten. Perhaps, maybe at your childhood, you still have some memory, but then you ought to have chances to practice Dharma, such that after
using
the Dharma practice and meditation to precipitate all disturbances, you may experience the return of the memory of your Dharma practice at your past lifetime or a few of your previous lifetimes. Or when the 100% blackness appears during the bardo of dying, at a few of your previous deaths, and, at time, if you have gained a little experience, then you can fill the gaps of those missing parts. As such, you remember them again and you could practice them again. So, you have to store them again from one lifetime to the next. Then, when you die, you would lose them again, and later, you could store them again, and so on. As a result, you would need the time of 0.5 Great Asamkhya Kalpa to be able to succeed. This is why I say, as you lack a little bit, then you would need 0.5 Great Asamkhya Kalpa to practice. And that is the reason, therefore, you must find a guru. You must follow him to practice Dharma. In return, from time to time, he must also correct your nature of mind and make right of those things that you have missed. But, in fact, if he doesn't even remember or doesn't know your name, then there is no way for him to correct your nature of mind. Indeed, he must know you well. So, if he knows you, and he knows what you have done wrong, then he must tell you what goes wrong. And then you must listen to what your guru tells you, and correct it. But many people dislike this kind of guru, as many people do not like others to point out their mistakes. Often tell you here you go wrong and there you go wrong. In fact, if your guru often tells you that you have done something wrong, you have violated a precept, and then he asks you to repent and to take the examination on precepts. Because of that, many people do not like it, so they do not follow this kind of guru. As a result, you would never be able to find a way to practice. But, indeed, you should find a guru like that, so that you could truly succeed in your Dharma practice. In fact, it is useless for the guru to just teach you some rituals, because you would only practice them blindly on your own, such that you cannot avoid the hindrances derived from the nature of
mind.
So, you will fail in the end. Therefore, it is very important for you to understand the characteristics and the visualization method of the Dharma nature, bodhicitta. I have taught you now, but there are some details missing. You still need to explore them for yourself. You also need to understand the characteristics of the bardo of dying, that I have just explained earlier. And also you have to act in concert with
Sufficient
power of meditation. That is why exoteric Buddhism's practitioner cannot make it, and therefore they have to practice for the time of 3 great Asamkhya Kalpas in order to reach that level. Think about it, you will need at least half Asamkhya Kalpa for you to understand these. Then, you can accumulate little experience at each time you die, and then pass it on to the next life. You have to wishing that you will not become a lower animal in the next life. And you also make wish that you can make it in your next life. That is, you could practice to the point where you could bring back 50% of your memory. Actually, you do not even know whether you could succeed through practice to restore 30% of memory. But then you die again, and then you store it again. Therefore, You really need to store for a very long time, and thus the time of half asam kaya kalpa for you to practice would indeed be the optimistic prediction. It
Actually,
may take a longer time. Actually, you have learned two things so far, while we are now teaching only the third and fourth parts. The first part will be taught in the future, but the second part will not be taught. It is because if you are not my disciple, so I do not know who you are, and there is also no way for me to know you, such that I cannot correct your nature of mind. I have already taught you why you should initiate the programming and entering the Dharma realm when you wake up from sleep, emerging from a meditative state, or at some transitional points of meditation. In fact, you are required to practice once a day. The purpose is to train you, so that you could accumulate enough experience at the time of your death. Therefore, this practice method requires the practitioner to practice at least once a day. The purpose is to prepare us for the appearance of the bardo of dying, when we die. You may say that, I meditate every day, so when I settle at the meditative
concentration,
or sitting for meditation, perhaps I can experience the stages of the
appearance,
increase, attainment, and luminosity, then I would have chances to attain
accomplishment.
But I can tell you, some Dharma practitioners meditate all their lives or meditate for a long period of time in the remote mountains. They might be able to experience once or twice, such that they are already very delighted for these experience, and after that, they could not experience it again. So, you should not have a high expectation. Nonetheless, as long as you listen to what I said to keep training yourself, then, even though it may not appear even once, still you have to keep
carrying
on practicing. By doing so, you are the smartest. If you practice during your lifetime, training 365 days a year, this is called
continuous
training. If you can practice it all 365 days, then you would have at least 365 chances. By contrast, if you wait until you die and practice, then you would just have one chance. And if you fail, then you would not have another chance. As such, you will have to die 365 times before you can make up for the present one, by continuously training for 365 days in this lifetime. But it actually does not add up. Why? It is because all 365 times continuously practice would provide you a sustained memory. On the other hand, while in your future lifetimes, every time you die, it would just provide little memories, and is called unsustained memory. So, the 365 times memories accumulated at each death in your future lifetimes is not
equivalent
to the 365 times memories accumulated at this lifetime. So, please remember this. It is indeed a waste for not practicing in your present lifetime. I repeat it once again. We must visualize our intrinsic nature, full of heart of pity, after integrating with all Buddhas to become oneness, so that we can dissolve the sufferings of all sentient beings. We then visualize our intrinsic nature, full of heart of mercy, and together with all sentient beings to merge into the infinite bliss of Dharmata. In addition, we must visualize this intrinsic nature to be all-pervasive, or prevail everywhere. There is no substance. It is a kind of awareness, because all these are the characteristics of the bodhicitta, perfect enlightenment, or intrinsic nature, Buddha nature, Dharma nature. If you want to initiate the programming and entering into the Dharma realm, you must possess these characteristics. So, we call it the initiation program in entering into the Dharma realm. It is the necessary things that required for the manifestation of the bodhicitta, so you should watch the second session of the visualization practice of compassion and bodhicitta. The visualization method of initiating the programming and entering into the Dharma realm to attain Buddhahood again, which is available on the Dudjom Buddhist Association's TV channel on YouTube. If you do not know such a visualization practice method, then you will need to spend the time of 3 great Asamkhya Kalpas to practice in order for you to be able to attain accomplishment. Why you need 3 great Asamkhya Kalpas? What is an Asamkhya Kalpa? I will explain it again now. Kalpa refers to a period of time. A minor kalpa equals to the time required for the universe to go through a cycle of formation, persistence, disintegration,
annihilation.
20 minor kalpas equals to 1 medium kalpa, 4 medium kalpas equal to 1 great kalpa, 1 asamkhya kalpa equals to 10 to the power 51 times of the time required for the universe to go through the stages of formation, persistence, disintegration, annihilation. That means 3 great asamkhya kalpas is actually an unknown long period of time. Therefore, some exoteric Buddhism's practitioners once told me, we'd rather
practice
Dharma slowly. By practicing slowly, we will be on the safe side. So, there's no need to be hurry. They said there is a saying in the esoteric Buddhism, as a snake on a bamboo, it can only either climb up or go down, so they are very frightened to hear that, and therefore they think that it would be better for them to practice Dharma slowly in order to be safe and steady. But I tell you that you have been deceived by others again. That the teaching of as a snake on a bamboo, it can only either climb up or go down, actually do also apply to the exoteric Buddhism's practitioners. In fact, all the tractional force of karma either pull you up or pull you down, there is no middle. What it really means is that you have to cultivate your nature of mind, otherwise, as you are unable to climb up, then you would only go down. It is all the same for the exoteric Buddhism's practitioners, as the teaching is not just applicable to the esoteric Buddhism's practitioners. Besides, it takes 3 great asamkhya kalpas for the exoteric Buddhism's practitioners to practice, as I said earlier, and if you are misfortunate to fall into hell, then there would be no way for you to get out. You will be blinded by all your greed, hatred and ignorance, such that not even a bit of compassion could be aroused. So, how can you save yourself? Therefore, the 3 great asamkhya kalpas actually means that it is a complete failure. The time is so long that you cannot count it, and it is actually equivalent to infinite. You would say, for practicing the 5 steps of compassion, what would happen if we just practice the 1st to the 4th steps but not practice all from the 1st to the 5th step at once? Then, you will need the time of 2 to 3 great asamkhya kalpas to practice, and you could only practice steps 1 to 4, according to the explanation of Buddha
Sakyamuni.
This is why the exoteric Buddhism's practitioner would require to practice for the time of 3 great asamkhya kalpas, as you have to build up to a certain level, such that you could reach the level to formally practice the 5th step. You say, it does not work like that, as I know how to meditate and understand the awareness training, so it is good enough for me. Of course not. It is because you still lack of many things, and one of which is the training of the initiation program in entering into the Dharma realm. If you do not have these training, then you would lack of many things. Some may disagree and say that there are ways for me to practice. Since you say it would be difficult for one to be reborn in the Buddha's Pure Land if one does not have compassion, so I will then practice compassion and recite Buddha's holy names or recite mantras. In fact, if you practice like that, then it means that you are trying to connect with all Buddhas by using your sound. But then, according to the Buddhist sutras, in order to succeed, You must practice to the extent that, without any disturbance of thoughts and his mind, without inversion, and also you have to achieve and keep such level of concentration for 1 day to 7 days. Because the speed of the sound is very slow, and also it is not transmitted continuously, and it cannot travel through a vacuum. Therefore, you have to keep reciting with high level of concentration for 1 day to 7 days, so that it enables the speed of the sound to be capable to connect with all Buddhas. While for the esoteric Buddhism, we would visualize ourselves to become a Yidim. In this way, we use our nature of mind to connect with all Buddhas. We still need to be, without any disturbance of thoughts and his mind, without inversion, i.e. high concentration. However, the concentration would just need to be last for a split second, but not require to last for such a long time like 1 day to 7 days. It is because the speed of mind is faster than the speed of light. And the speed of mind is also many times faster than the speed of sound, therefore, visualization is different. It is many times faster than reciting mantras or Buddha's holy names. In fact, do we connect with all Buddhas through 1. Our nature of mind, or 2. The strength of our visualization to visualize all Buddhas? I can tell you, it is through the nature of mind, not the strength of visualization. So, if your nature of mind is bad, then even though you are good at painting and you also have a good visualization capability, you are still unable to connect with all Buddhas. Therefore, the nature of mind is indeed the most important criterion. This is because the nature of mind of all Buddhas is compassion. So, if you do not have compassion, then you would not be able to link up with them. Then, what is Yidim? In Vajrayana, Yidim means the master of the Dharma. For each of the Vajrayanas Dharma practice ritual that you practice. So, if you practice a ritual, then you would use the corresponding Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as an object to visualize. And this is called Yidim, which is the object for you to visualize. When you visualize, it should have 2 important elements, which is 1. Form of appearance, and 2. Nature of mind. However, nowadays, many just focus on 1 element, i.e. form. You say, I do not need the nature of mind, all I need to do is just to visualize the form of appearance. Some may say, I have the empowerment, and after receiving the empowerment, I visualize. And I have the rituals, too. So, I would be able to visualize. In addition, I am able to practice this ritual. As long as I am able to
Visualize.
then I would definitely know how to get to the Buddha's Pure Land. In fact, you would not be able to go to the Buddha's Pure Land. Why? It is true that the correct empowerment would help you to reduce your evil karma, that is true. However, incorrect empowerment would indeed increase your evil karma, it is told by the sutras and tantras. According to the Volume 8, chapter on Bodhisattva's 10 abodes, of the Avatamsaka Sutra, and the upper volume, chapter of the names of sages and holies, of the Sutra of the Garland of a Bodhisattva's primary karmas, when you start practicing Dharma, you could already call yourself Bodhisattva. But you have to get to the 10th stage of the 10 abode, where the 10th stage is just a base. By then, you could receive empowerment. The 10th abode is called the abode of empowerment. Therefore, it is only when your own nature of mind has reached that level, then empowerment would be useful for you. And Buddhas and Bodhisattvas would acknowledge you. If you have not attained that level yet, but your guru has granted you the empowerment, then,
According
to the sutras and tantras, this is a fault, which is called transgression on the overstepping of the holy Dharma, meaning that it is overstepping the rules to transmit the Dharma, as you are not a suitable vessel to receive this Dharma. But you still receive it. In other words, you have not reached that level, but you overstep the rules to accept the Dharma. This indeed is an evil karma. You say, would the Dharma punish you? It would not. In fact, both the giver and the taker commit faults, and both would have this phenomenon. Why? Because it is an issue of karma. No one will punish you as this person who have not yet reached that level, but you have given him empowerment, so it would overdraw his virtuous rewards, and would also trigger his greed, hatred and ignorance, such that he would become very greedy, wanting to receive one more empowerment after receiving one empowerment. Or he would also like to receive the empowerment of Jamhala, god of wealth, as the empowerment of Jamhala would trigger the allocation of the virtuous rewards of your portfolio of virtuous and non-virtuous deeds. So the virtuous rewards would then be picked up and used up first. In fact, you are just using your own virtuous rewards, but the virtuous rewards are not suddenly falling from the sky or are given by Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to you. So, you will overdraw your own virtuous rewards, and it would cause you a big trouble in your next life or the remaining lifetime in this life. Overdrawing one's virtuous rewards is indeed a very big thing. You may say, I do not receive the empowerment of Jamhala, and I do not practice the methods of the puja for Jamhala. But other things would also use your own virtuous rewards. This will result in triggering your greed, hatred and ignorance, and you will become greedier, such that you would continuously look for and receive empowerments. This means that you have violated the precept. The receiver would violate the precept, as he is not eligible to receive the empowerment, and by receiving the empowerment, it would also affect and drag up all his karma. On the other hand, the person who give the empowerment would also bear similar retributions. Indeed, why the empowerment giver would give the empowerment to him? It is because he has not observed his disciple well in the first place. In fact, it is clearly stated in the sutras and tantras that you have to observe the disciple before you could give empowerments to them. The rule is clear. But you still purchase for advertisement in newspapers, and everywhere you call peoples and tell them they could come to receive the empowerment. But then, you do not
actually
know these peoples. Anyhow, you give them the empowerment. However, these are completely prohibited by the sutras and tantras. As a result, you have violated the precept. What will happen if you have violated the precept? The person who receives the empowerment will be implicated by you. So, you would also suffer from any bad karma that he generated. Hence, if you grant empowerment to 100 people, then you would also suffer from the relevant
retributions
that derive from those evil karma that generated by these 100 people. Therefore, such a guru will certainly go down to hell. According to sutras and tantras, any guru who commits the transgression on the overstepping of the holy Dharma will go down to hell. It is not that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas will punish you, but it was made by the traction of the karma itself. Therefore, we must be very careful. You can watch an upcoming video on the Dajom Buddhist Association's TV channel on YouTube. Can empowerments be
casually
received? Please remember not to accept empowerments carelessly, as this is indeed very dangerous. In particular, it is completely futile if the guru does not correct your
nature
or of
mind.
The nature of mind is indeed very important. Most Buddhist sutras, such as the Sutra of Visualization of the Buddha of Infinite Life, all teach you to visualize Buddha's form of appearance. They teach you how to visualize in more detail the better, as it would let you connect with Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. But you say, you do not need the form of appearance, but just focus on the nature of
mind.
As of the exoteric Buddhism's practitioners today, they say that the nature of mind are good, and also full of compassion. But they do not like visualization, and also do not know how to visualize. So, they give up on visualization. But, actually, do you know that you only need to visualize a precious gem on the treasure crown of the Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara? Then you could already have the opportunity to connect with Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara. You say, I give it up as I could not visualize, and that means you just give up. Why give up? Do know that the Sutra of Visualization of the Buddha of Infinite Life have taught you, at time when you visualize Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara, you have to
Visualize.
in details including every single precious gems on the treasure crown of Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara. You say, you are not able to visualize them all. But how about visualize just one precious gem? One precious gem is okay. But you must visualize, and that is the requirement. Hence, if like the exoteric Buddhism's practitioners, only focusing on nature of mind, but not care about form of appearance, then it would have this kind of phenomenon. In fact, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas urge you to learn visualization, as it will be faster, and you do not need to keep a high concentration for 1 to 7 days, such that once you lose your concentration, you would also lose the connection. Then, what is the consequence? At the time of your death, once you disconnect, the karmic forces would immediately appear, then you would get downfall. As such, the failure rate is very high. So, please listen to what the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas say, that is, you should train to visualize. There are many levels of compassion. If you opt not to visualize to connect with Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, then even you have sufficient virtuous karma that you would have chance to be reborn in the Buddha's pure land. But there is also a great chance for you to be reborn in places other than the Buddha's pure land. You say, I have good karma. However, if your evil karma comes out first, then you would fall down into the 3 lower realms. You also say, what if my virtuous karma comes out first? Then, perhaps, you might be able to be reborn in the ordinary, a realm of heavens, but there is no Buddhist Dharma, which means they are not the Buddha's pure land. In fact, if you have sufficient virtuous deeds, then you still have the chance to be reborn in the realm of heavens. However, if you do not have enough virtuous deeds, then you would fall down to the 3 lower realms. Indeed, you may not even have sufficient virtuous deeds for you to be reborn as human. As according to Buddha Sakyamuni, there is little chance to be reborn as human, due to the fact that the size of the human population is pretty small when compared to other realms. As a result, you will fall into the 3 lower realms. This is due to the fact that nowadays humans are reluctant to give birth. If they are willing, they just have one at most. As such, they do not even have a chance, so it is very easy for you to fall into the 3 lower realms. As you cannot wait for that long for you to be reborn in the
3
upper realms, then it is likely that your bad karma would appear first, so that you would be dragged into a realm of hungry ghosts, or realm of hells. Therefore, we must try our best to connect with Buddhas and Bodhisattvas so as to seek their help. If you fail, then you would fall down to the 3 lower realms. So, the level of your compassion should not be too low, and thus you should try your best to cultivate your compassion well when you are alive. You should also remember not to violate precepts. If you violate precept lightly, but you do not lose your bodhicitta, compassion, then there is still a chance for you to be reborn in the Buddha's pure land, but according to the sutras, if you succeed to be reborn in the Buddha's pure land, you may be confined inside a lotus, so you may have to wait for a long time before the lotus would blossom. However, if you have violated precept seriously, but you are still not losing your compassion, then if you could take rebirth in the Buddha's pure land, You would be confined inside a lotus for a very long time, longer than 12 great kalpas. How long is 12 great kalpas? As said earlier, a minor kalpa equals the time required for the universe to go through a cycle of formation, persistence,
disintegration,
annihilation. 20 minor kalpas equals 1 medium kalpa, and 4 medium kalpas equal to 1 great kalpa, so you can work out how long 12 great kalpas are. Nevertheless, being trapped in O's lotus is better than being trapped in the 3 lower realms, that is, a realm of hells, realm of hungry ghosts, and realm of animals. Why? It is because your 80 kinds of greed, hatred and ignorance would not fiercely emerge, rather they just gradually weaken. Hence, it would be better for you to be reborn in the lotus of the Buddha's Pure Land than to be reborn in the 3 lower realms. Therefore, for those who have seriously violated precepts and have been put into
Brahmadanda,
which means that they were prohibited from all conversation and communication with the Sangha group, including all other disciples, they should repent as quickly as possible. After the repentance, they must pray to be accepted to be reborn in the lotus of the Buddha's Pure Land. Nonetheless, if you do not have bodhicitta, then you would not be able to attain Buddhahood. So, what practice we should rely on, sir, as to enable us to attain Buddhahood? We should rely on practicing
emptiness,
neither existence nor voidness, to attain Buddhahood. And by using the balanced middle way of bodhicitta, perfect enlightenment, to enter the Dharma realm. That means we must practice and keep the bodhicitta. It is because the characteristics of bodhicitta is compassion. Is it what you say?
Emptiness
actually is neither existence nor voidness. Therefore, we must rely on our guru to teach us how to master the practice of emptiness. Then, why it takes us 2.5 great Asamkhya kalpas just to practice compassion and relative bodhicitta, before we could go to practice the absolute bodhicitta. I have explained this before. Here I will explain it briefly. It is because you need to start from the theory. As exoteric Buddhism's practitioners are very fond of talk about theory, understand the set of theory, and then accept it. Nonetheless, after understood the theory, many people do not accept it or just accept 20% of it. In fact, this cannot be called acceptance. In order for you to be eligible to try to practice, the degree of your acceptance should reach 100%. You say, I just accept 20% of it, then can I try to practice? You can, but the progress would be slow. Attempt and long-term practice are two different things. You have to practice on a long-term basis in order to make it to become your habit, so that this habit would be accumulated to the extent that even in your dream you would remember it, such that even you are chased by a ghost in your dream, you still remember that programming. And that could truly become your habit. We must also accumulate virtuous karma, and linking up with our thinking to become our own dominant thoughts, such that we would think and act in this way. Things related to propagate Buddhist Dharma, and things related to other sentient beings would all be more important than our personal private matters. Then, it would become our dominant thoughts, and would enter our subconsciousness. Only if you could do so, then it could be brought along to become the memory of your next life, so that it could be extended to your next life. Because of that, when you enter the mother's womb, you could continue to have the 100% memories of your previous life. But I can tell you that the majority of people would fail. Some people practice the meditative concentration in the remote mountains for a long time, but they can only restore 50% of the memory from their previous life. So, it is very difficult to restore 100% of it, and thus you have to go back to the above-mentioned procedure again until you could restore 100% of it. And this explains why you need the time of 2.5 Asamkhya kalpas to practice. It also points out that your practice is far too cumbersome. Therefore, you need to continue to uplift your nature of mind and accumulate virtuous deeds. That means you have to restore 100% of it before you're able to continue this journey. So, you have to keep accumulating, and until one life you have
accumulated
enough of it. So, you could arouse your wisdom at last, and thus you know how to practice in complement with precepts. Meditative concentration and wisdom, in a balanced middle way, to practice the bodhicitta of aspiration and bodhicitta of action. Therefore, you can go up to the next stage. There is a
question
that, would the virtuous deeds accumulated and the wisdom aroused from thoughts be sufficient enough for you to comprehend the Heart Sutra? In fact, for more than 1,000 years to 2,000 years, people have just literally
interpreted
the Heart Sutra, but not be able to explain that. Heart Sutra actually describes the phenomenon emerging for the state of oneness of the Dharma realm. So, you can imagine how hard it is to correctly understand the essence of the Buddhist sutras. And it really means that there is insufficient of wisdom, such that they have misinterpreted the Buddhist sutras. For more than 1,000 years to 2,000 years, no one has been able to interpret it correctly. And this actually means that your wisdom has not yet reached that level. As such, you need the time of 2.5 Asamkhya kalpas to practice. In fact, even those who teach Buddhist Dharma do not know how to interpret it. So, that is the reason why you need to practice for 2.5 Asamkhya kalpas. After you have aroused wisdom, you understand the state of oneness described in the Heart Sutra, you would then understand why you need to practice Dharma. And also you know how to continue to practice to reach the level that is considered to be the state of oneness, such that you would be able to further realize emptiness, neither existence nor voidness. Otherwise, how would you know what this is all about? In addition, you should not have interruptions in your Dharma practice. That is, you should not practice a bit and then stop practicing. If you only practice 12 days out of a year of 365 days, that is not enough, and that is called interruptions. Whether you violate a precept and not repent, or you do not practice Buddhist Dharma, or you miss the opportunity to learn Dharma, whichever applies to you, it turns out that you would endlessly fall into the 3 lower realms to take rebirth, and you would never be able to get out. But you may say this is too hard. However, you just need to fall into hell once. Then you would be very miserable, as there is no way for you to get out. The Lord Buddha Shakyamuni once warned us that everything is impermanence. So you should cherish. If you have someone in this life who is so kind and not bother to do the hard work to explain to you in such great details, then you must cherish it. It is because in your next life, there may not be someone who would explain to you in this way again. You have said that if I practice absolute bodhicitta, but I am lacking of some details and also I do not have the guru to correct my nature of mind, and therefore I have to practice for half Asamkhya kalpa. Then what does it mean? Did you say you would like to attain Buddhahood in the present lifetime? If you know the keys, and you read the Tibetan Book
the Dead,
and understand what it says, but this does not mean you know how to apply it. When you arouse all wisdom, you need to obtain those knowledge on the key of life and death. After you obtain that, you also need to understand and practice the knowledge on the key of life and death. In fact, most importantly, you need to have a specially assigned expert to train you the teachings on the key of life and death, and he must clearly explain all the details. Moreover, he also needs to guide you through the practice. Then he has to take the responsibility to correct your nature of mind. Hence, when you often violate precepts, your nature of mind is not good, and also you have lots of greed, hatred and ignorance, then he would rebuke you. In fact, you are very lucky to be
disciplined
and taught by him. If you have been
disciplined
and taught for 10 years, assuming your guru has 10 years of life from now, then I really want to congratulate you. Then, if your guru has 20 years of life from now, then I would like to congratulate you again, as he can discipline you for 20 years. Let's say, you practice for 10 years, so for 10 years times 365 days, then you would have practiced 3,650 times. As such, there is hope for you to become a Buddha in the present lifetime. This is because you have already trained for so many times, and have trained continuously too. And you also practice Trekcho of the Great Perfection before you die. So you would have the training that enable you to, directly pointing to the nature of mind, which will be explained and taught in the later sessions on the series of the
visualization
practice method of compassion and bodhicitta. Otherwise, even if you know how to practice the visualization method for the absolute bodhicitta that I have taught you, and later I will explain the oral pitch instructions to you again. But if you do not have a specially assigned expert to teach and train you some teachings on the key of life and death, and you also lack of the details, and so you have to explore for yourself, such that you have to die once, then you would recover your memory for the teachings in your past lives. You would remember them at last, that is, you listened to this lecture on the 10th of December 2017. Based on that, you would try to practice. But it is often very hard to you to grasp it, as it is pretty hard to grasp. Indeed, even for many Dharma practitioners who have practiced for a long time, they still do not know how to grasp it. So, you would fail again. Then, you have to wait for the next time when you die again. Therefore, you have to die for 3,650 times. So that you could practice for 3,650 times. However, the effect generated by this is still far less than the effect generated for you to practice continuously for 3,650 times when you are alive. Therefore, you need the time of half-asamhyaya kalpa for you to accumulate. And that is what it means. Hence, if there is no guru to correct your nature of mind and follow your case, then, in fact, it means that you won't be able to succeed. It is because we need to mainly rely on our own nature of mind if we truly want to get to the Buddha's Pure Land or to attain Buddhahood. And now I will teach and explain the oral pith instruction. What is the most precise way for the visualization practice? Of course, it requires oral pith instructions. We have introduced the Treasury of Dharmadhatu, an essential collection of the oral pith instructions for those who practice the Great Perfection, by Kungkyen Longchen Rabjam, one of the Guru Master of the Nyingma school, or the Red Sect, who specializes in practicing the Great Perfection. These are the collection of the oral pith instructions from the 17 Dzogchen Tantras, which is the oral pitch instructions of 17 uncommon kinds of actual practice methods. It is the part in Great Perfection that describes the firm approach in cutting through solidity, the Dharma nature, bodhicitta, why we need to cut through solidity. It is because it, i.e., Dharma nature, has no forms of appearances, therefore, we need to cut off completely from all the forms of appearances, so as to enable the bodhicitta of the Dharma nature to manifest. Now I will explain the oral pith instructions for the visualization practice, the one I did not have time to explain last time.
Intrinsic nature is primordially pure
bodhicitta. It describes our bodhicitta, that is, our perfect enlightenment, which is our intrinsic nature, Buddha nature, and is what we have originally possessed. It is very natural, pure and clean. It does not need to be fabricated. And it naturally exists. It is a kind of the perfect enlightenment of the state of oneness. Please remember it firmly, Dharma nature is nowhere to be placed. And it neither comes nor goes. What does this mean? It means that you do not need to think where the Dharma nature has gone or be placed. Is the Dharma nature at the top of the head? Or is it in the Buddha's Pure Land? It is completely wrong. In fact, it is all-pervasive. This sentence means that the Dharma nature is all-pervasive, so there is no need for you to think where it exists. How to place this Dharma nature? It comes and goes instantly. So, it neither comes nor goes. It does not travel from one place to another, as it is all-pervasive, and it exists everywhere. And that is why it does not need to travel from this place to that place. This is how to explain this sentence. Searching nowhere for the Dharma nature but in the realm of emptiness. What if you like to find out where the Dharma nature stays? Would the Dharma nature exists in the realm of emptiness? In fact, how could we place it? Where could it be placed? I will tell you now. Intrinsic nature is placed where the lights of sun and moon arise. And that's it. What is the Dharma nature? As long as you could manifest the lights of the sun and moon, then the Dharma nature would appear. In fact, this is what I have already told you earlier. Why I have to repeatedly explain the phenomena of the bardo of dying. It is because I would like to explain this oral pith instructions. That is, when the white wisdom drop appears. And I have already said it before and also asked you to remember it that feels like the clear and cloudless sky, and the bright and clear moonlight. There is completely absent of interference. So there are no clouds. And there is the bright and clear moonlight, so the moon is emerging when the red wisdom drop appears. It is then a ray of light at the break of dawn, so it means the sun is also emerging. This is the stage of attainment, being dissolved into luminosity, after or failed when it manifested for the first time. Then you still have the opportunity for the Dharma nature to appear for the second time. And that is the stage of attainment, being dissolved into luminosity. And that is when the luminosity appears. This is called where the lights of sun and moon arise. Some books have wrongly interpreted it. They have explained this sentence like that. The manifestation of the Dharma nature is like the sun and moon with cloudless sky. But the sentence actually refers to the moment the sun and moon appear during the stage of bardo of dying, is indeed the moment our Dharma nature manifests. As for where to place the Dharma nature, the primordial Dharma nature is
invisible.
It does not have any form of appearance, so how do you know its
appearance?
And how do you grasp the moment when it appears? It is the moment when the sun and moon appear at the stage of bardo of dying, then you know that this is its appearance. If there is a guru, Rinpoche, or books that misinterpret this sentence, then what are the consequences? When interpreted wrongly, the result would be completely
different.
It would be completely different. So you would be mistakenly assuming that the Dharma nature cannot be interfered, which is similar to the thinking that the sun and moon should not be interfered. But this is wrong. In fact, it should not be interpreted in this way. It actually explains that if you want to practice the procedure of appearance, increase attainment and luminosity of the stage of bardo of dying, and when you practice, that is also the time for the Dharma nature to appear. And so you ought to remember to master this oral pith instruction of the visualization practice firmly. That is, when you practice the oral pith instruction, you have to do this. Then, how should we carry out this oral pith instruction? That is, neither deny the scenes nor to grasp your own mind. And this is the oral pith instruction when you formally practice for the stage of bardo of dying. It says, do not deny the scene. What does it mean? We think there should not have the sun, as the Dharma nature does not have any form of
appearance.
so we should remove this sun, pretending that it does not appear. But this is wrong. Then, what does it mean by grasping your own mind? We think. Does it mean that the sun and moon is actually the manifestation of the Dharma nature? Is it that the Dharma nature is just coming out? You should not do all these. So, that neither deny the scenes nor to grasp your own mind means that you should not think in your mind, what is this? If you do these, then it actually shows that you do not have adequate training. Therefore, you should train yourself every day. Why you still think of that, that is, to grasp your own mind to determine, what is this? Indeed, these are all wrong. In a state like this, you should have already initiated the programming in entering into the Dharma realm. After initiating the programming, then there is no need to grasp your own mind. And there is also no need to deny the scene. So, you just let the intrinsic nature manifest itself naturally with non-action, that is, you think of nothing, and also do nothing. But just let the intrinsic nature to manifest naturally. Then, you could enter that state, and you should get hold on to that state. Non-action means that you do not take any action but only need to get hold on to that, and let it develop naturally. You also need to initiate the programming and entering into the Dharma realm. But then, when you lack of any one of these, then you would not succeed in your practice. If you lack of the things that I have taught you earlier, that is, initiating the programming and entering into the Dharma realm beforehand, then you would not be able to succeed. It is because you do not possess the characteristics, so how could you enter? Next, if you do not have power of meditation, then you would not be able to stay in the state of black attainment, such that you would not be able to stay at the point where the light appears at the break of dawn. If you can't stay, then how could you enter? If you still continue to grasp your own mind, thinking that it would appear, but you do not pay your attention to the programming and oral pith instructions that I have taught you. In fact, you should have incorporated the programming, oral pith instructions, good training. And you also need to incorporate the correction of your nature of mind, taught by your guru. And it is required that you have to incorporate all these together. And these are the oral pith instructions of the visualization practice, which means you have to remember to initiate the programming in entering into the Dharma realm, together with these oral pith instructions. And then you could realize the vastness of the enlightened intent of Samantabhadra, such that you could attain the Dharma body of Buddha. In fact, what does it mean? Vastness means that your Dharma nature, bodhicitta, perfect enlightenment, is all-pervasive. So, it is vastness, and is as vast as the great perfection, that is. It is so vast as to completely cover everything without any omissions, as this is the great perfection. And that is a meaning for vastness. Then, what is Samantabhadra? Why you say this sentence, and that means you could attain the Dharma body Buddha? I will explain it now. Samantabhadra is the Tathagata. Samantabhadra, Tathagata, means Buddha. Samantabhadra is also called the Dharmakaya Buddha. Samantabhadra, esoteric Buddhism calls him the primordial Buddha. Who is the Dharma body of Buddha? He is the first,
original,
and highest Buddha of the three realms. He symbolizes the luminosity of the intrinsic nature and the crystal clarity of the Buddha nature that were possessed in the minds of all sentient beings. The teaching of the Great Perfection originated from Tathagata Samantabhadra and was introduced into Tibet by Guru Padmasambhava. Why do people think that the Great Perfection is more prestigious than all other teachings that invented by all those worldly masters? Whether it is Mahamudra, literally means great seal, or great imprint, or others, people still believe that the Great Perfection is the highest. It is simply because it is taught by a Buddha who truly attains the Dharma body of Buddha. It is not taught by a human, as human would have limitations. Because sentient beings have not yet attained Buddhahood, so how can they teach you? They are still in the process of practicing Dharma. But then, their teachings would still have benefits. That the oral pith instructions that they have taught you, and or the Mahamudra that they have taught you would also have their essence. Such that we have to absorb all the essence from various practicing methods, only that they must be correct. Hence, you should know how to do your own screening, picking out those things that are not correct. Thus, you would be able to understand the deeper meaning of the great perfection. So, they are indeed the auxiliary conditions. The great perfection is publicly recognized as the highest essence of the Dharma practice, as it is the most complete and perfect teaching, and there is no errors or omissions. If there is any error or omission, then it would definitely be caused by yourself, that is, you have misinterpreted its oral pith instructions. Indeed, it is the most complete and perfect teachings because it was taught by a Dharma body of Buddha, and so the great perfection could help us to attain the Dharma body of Buddha. The oral pith instructions that I have taught you now is to teach you how to detect the appearance of the Dharma nature, such that you could then practice it. The meaning of Samantabhadra is indeed Dharma body of Buddha. While 4. Realize the vastness of the enlightened intent of Samantabhadra, it means that you have understood the great perfections teaching of the Tathagata Samantabhadra, Dharma body of Buddha, at last. And you know how to practice it. So, you finally understand it and have an opportunity to attain the Dharma body of Buddha. If you do not understand it, you would not be able to attain accomplishment. Therefore, this oral pith instruction is very important, as when we practice our bodhicitta, we must have oral pith instructions. And also when we practice the key of bardo of dying, we must have oral pith instructions. This oral pith instruction is neither deny the scenes nor to grasp your own mind. Let the intrinsic nature manifest itself naturally with non-action. We must memorize it firmly. But then, we must not just recite it, we should know how to apply it, that is, when we do the actual practice, we have to apply this oral pith instruction to work with the initiation program until we could enter that state. By then, we would be able to attain the Dharma body of Buddha. This is called realize the vastness of the enlightened intent of Samantabhadra. So, if you do not know how to understand this oral pith instruction, then, in fact, you would not be able to work with the stage of the bardo of dying to practice. Indeed, if you merely misinterpret the two words, sun and moon, then the consequence would be different. And if you just memorize these two sentences of oral pith instruction, or even the whole article, but then you would still fail. In fact, we must know the key for the emerging of the sun and moon, and the luminosity. On the 31st of December 2017, there will be an incense offerings ceremony for Amitabha Buddha in the second anniversary of His Holiness Kyabje Chadral Sangye Dorje Rinpoche's entering into Mara Parinirvana. On that day, I will also give the lecture for the fourth session of the visualization practice of compassion and bodhicitta. We have just finished the third session today. For the fourth session, I will explain the second stage after death, and the title is Attaining the Sambhogakaya Buddha of the teachings on the key of life and death. For ordinary people, if they have not learned it, they would not even be able to see the manifestation of this second stage, the bardo of Dharmata. But if they have learned it and they know some keys to practice, then they could enter the bardo of Dharmata. And if they have opportunity to incorporate the oral pith instruction to their practice, then they would be able to attain Sambhogakaya Buddha. This will be covered in the next session. Of course, We will also explain the Great Perfections, oral pith instructions for the initiating programming and entering into the Dharma realm to attain Buddhahood, and other oral pith instructions. There are many oral pith instructions for the visualization
practice
of bodhicitta, taught in the treasury of Dharma Dhatu. I have just now taught you the most important oral pith instructions for the bardo of dying, taking out from the treasury of Dharma Dhatu. Some people do not even know the oral pith instruction for the bardo of dying, so I have taken them out from the treasury of Dharma Dhatu to teach you. I will also compare them with the oral pith instructions of the visualization practice that's taught in the Heart Sutra. Indeed, Heart Sutra describes the state of oneness of the Dharma realm, and so would there be anything in the Heart Sutra that can help us? So, we will make a comparison so as to give all of you more auxiliary conditions for your practice. That is all for the session today.